Chapter 1407. The reason Qi Yaoyao and the others were shocked was because two figures had appeared behind Yi Xian. These two figures were actually at the Dao completion realm. Another two at the Dao completion realm. Doubting didn't only have two at the Dao completion realm, but four. When they saw this scene, many experts of the fifth dimension already felt despair. If there were only two at the Dao completion realm, then the fifth dimension could still fight them. But now there were four. How could they fight? They couldn't fight at all. The two Dao completion realm experts charged at Yi Xian as soon as they appeared. Obviously, they didn't want to give Yi Xian any chance. This was normal, because no one knew what would happen if Yi Xian reached the Dao resistance realm. The best way was to kill him before he broke through. Nearby, when they saw the two Dao attainment realm experts and the Dao ancestor charge towards Yi Xian, the expressions of Xianxia and the other women instantly changed, and they charged directly towards Yi Xian. However, it was utterly too late. Because the speed of the Dao ancestor and the two Dao attainment experts was simply too fast. The Lord and the others were also looking at Yi Xian. If the person behind Yi Xian didn't appear, then Yi Xian would basically be gone. Right at this moment, the three Dao ancestors who were charging at Yi Xian seemed to have noticed something. Their expressions changed drastically, and they retreated like madmen. An ear-piercing sword howl suddenly resounded. The Lord's eyes narrowed. Not far away, over a dozen strands of sword qi were circling around Yi Xian. This wasn't Yi Xian's sword qi. It was the sword qi that Yi Xian had brought out of the dark realm. Who was the owner of this sword qi? It was Situ Tingyun. Besides the green-clothed man, she was the strongest in the sword Dao in the sword sect. Even though these strands of sword qi were ownerless, they were still very powerful. In the distance, the three Dao ancestors had extremely solemn expressions. It was especially so for the Dao ancestor. His expression was unprecedentedly solemn. He had seen such a powerful sword qi once before, from Moon Yanyan. And now he saw it again. And this sword qi was clearly not Moon Yanyan's sword qi. In other words, behind Yi Xian, there was a powerful swordsman who was no weaker than Moon Yanyan. On the other side, Qin Yaoyao suddenly said, "The sword qi in the dark world vortex." Rahu nodded. I didn't expect him to be able to use this sword qi. This guy is too mysterious. The Lord looked at the sword qi and fell into deep thought. Not far away, Yi Xian closed his eyes. At this moment he felt that he had reached a critical point. The breakthrough was imminent. At that moment, the nearby Dao ancestor suddenly said, "This sword qi has no owner." Ownerless sword qi. In other words, if the sword qi was destroyed, there would be nothing left. The Dao ancestor was about to make a move when Yi Xian suddenly opened his eyes. How do you know it has no owner? The Dao ancestor stared at Yi Xian. If it has a owner, why don't you let the sword qi's owner come out? Yi Xian smiled. Dao ancestor, aren't you thinking too highly of yourself? Are you worthy of letting the sword qi's owner come out? The Dao ancestor was expressionless. Yi Xian, at this point, is there any use in using words? If you have someone, then call them out. Yi Xian laughed. Dao ancestor, are you afraid? The Dao ancestor looked at Yi Xian and was about to speak. At that moment, a Dao attainment expert suddenly said, "He's stalling for time." Stalling for time? The Dao ancestor narrowed his eyes. At this moment, Yi Xian's aura was unprecedentedly powerful. He was about to break through. The Dao ancestor suddenly said, "Destroy the sword qi first." With that, he charged at Yi Xian. The other two Dao fulfillment experts also rushed over. Meanwhile, the sword qi around Yi Xian slashed out. Over a dozen sword qi tore through the starry sky. It was extremely terrifying. It had to be said that the Dao ancestor and the other two Dao attainment experts were suppressed by the sword qi. Even the Dao ancestor and the other two Dao attainment experts didn't dare to go head-on against the sword qi. On the other side, the Lord said softly, "A single sword qi that hasn't been destroyed for tens of thousands of years, and it's so powerful. It's ridiculously powerful." Luo Ho and the others didn't look too good. They were supposed to be the strongest experts in this world. But after seeing the sword qi, they suddenly realized that they were really weak. Not only was the sword qi indestructible for tens of thousands of years, but it was also so powerful. What they thought was the pinnacle was just a joke to some people. It was like that to Mu Nian, and it was the same to the sword qi's owner. In the distance, after the Dao ancestor and the other two Dao attainment experts were stalled by the sword qi, Yi Xian began to break through to the Dao attainment realm. He had to reach the Dao attainment realm. Once he did, his overall strength would undergo a qualitative transformation. At this moment, the Dao ancestor and the other two Dao attainment experts were burning with anxiety. If Yi Xian reached the Dao attainment realm, Yi Xian wouldn't be able to fight against the three of them alone. However, once he reached the Dao attainment realm, he would become an unknown variable. Who knew what would happen after he reached the Dao attainment realm? Not far away, the Dao ancestor and the other two Dao attainment experts began to use their full strength. Although the sword qi suppressed the three Dao ancestors, it was becoming more and more illusory. After all, it was ownerless sword qi that could be consumed and destroyed. On the other side, the battle between the experts of the fifth dimension and the experts of the Dao court was in full swing. The experts of the fifth dimension were at a slight disadvantage, but because of the 12 Naga Dragon souls, the experts of the fifth dimension were only at a slight disadvantage. This was because the 12 Naga Dragon souls were really too powerful. In order to deal with the 12 Naga Dragon souls, the Dao Ting had mobilized a total of 26 divine sovereigns. Moreover, these 26 divine sovereigns were being suppressed by the 12 Naga Dragon souls. In addition, Li Zua and the other two Dao ancestors were also extremely powerful. The three of them were forcefully holding back 11 divine sovereigns. It could be said that it would be difficult to determine the victor between the two sides in a short period of time. However, the situation was becoming more and more disadvantageous for Yi Xian's side. This was because two of Yi Xian's dozen sword qis had already disappeared. Although the sword qis were powerful, they were ownerless. If they were consumed too much, they would completely disappear. Now, the Dao ancestors and the other two Dao ancestors were madly consuming these sword qis. On the other side, Luo Ho said softly, "He's about to break through." Just as he finished speaking, boom. In the distance, a powerful aura suddenly erupted from Yi Xian's body. Wherever this aura passed, the surrounding starry sky trembled. Dao attainment realm. Seeing that Yi Xian was breaking through, Luo Ho shook his head. This guy breaks through like eating. It's really infuriating to compare oneself with others. The Lord smiled. He risked his life. Qi Yaoyao suddenly said, "Does the Dao Ting still have a trump card?" The Lord looked at Qi Yaoyao and smiled. "You want to help?" Qi Yaoyao said softly, "Why not?" The Lord smiled. "If we help Yi Xian, even if the Dao Ting has a trump card, we can still destroy the Dao Ting. Of course, we will just have to pay a price." Qi Yaoyao looked at the Lord. "Does the Lord not choose to help because you have other concerns?" The Lord looked at the faraway Yi Xian and said softly, "He is a whirlpool. If we get too involved, it will be difficult for us to escape in the future." Qi Yaoyao was silent. She knew that the Lord was talking about the reason for Yi Xian's misfortune. The Lord was worried about this. At this moment, the Lord suddenly smiled. "Let's wait and see." In the distance, after Yi Xian broke through, he waved his right hand and the 10 sword energies suddenly flew back in front of him. Seeing this, the Dao ancestor and the others' expressions became even uglier. It wasn't because of Yi Xian's breakthrough, but because Yi Xian could control the 10 sword energies. After all, these 10 sword energies weren't Yi Xian's own sword energies. Yi Xian greedily took a deep breath. Dao Defense Realm. After reaching the Dao Defense Realm, he felt that everything was different. His divine soul, divine sense, strength, and his own body, everything had undergone earth-shattering changes. As if thinking of something, Yi Xian suddenly looked at the Dao ancestor. The next moment, he appeared in front of the Dao ancestor and slashed down with his sword, Dao sword, and 4 more domains. The Dao ancestor narrowed his eyes, took a step forward, and pointed out with a finger. Heda. At this moment, Yi Xian's sword fell. Boom. Under the gazes of everyone. The Dao ancestor was instantly pushed over 1 kilometer back, and his right index finger had been severed by Yixian's attack. Besides that, his right arm had split open and blood sprayed from it. The expressions of everyone here became solemn when they witnessed this scene. The Lord frowned slightly as well. Isn't Yixian's strength a little too exaggerated after he attained the Dao defense realm? He'd injured a Dao ancestor with a single strike of his sword. Meanwhile, Yan Yaoyao suddenly said, "It's his body." The Lord gazed at Yixian and spoke softly, "What formidable physical strength! What cultivation technique does he cultivate? His body is actually so strong." Yixian's combat strength had risen by so much mainly because of his physical body. Dao defense. Now, Yixian hadn't just attained the Dao defense realm in terms of physical body, his cultivation had as well. It wasn't as simple as 1 + 1. The Dao ancestor stared fixedly at Yixian from afar, and he was extremely shocked. How could Yixian's combat strength be so great after attaining the Dao defense realm? The Dao ancestor restrained his thoughts and glanced at the two others. "Let's attack together." As soon as he finished speaking, he charged forward. The other 2 experts at the Dao formation realm attacked as well. 3 experts at the Dao formation realm attacked together. Yixian took a step forward and slashed with his sword. Bang! His attack blasted the Dao ancestor back, but it only took a moment for 2 fists to smash against Yixian's chest and head. Bang! Yixian's figure was instantly blasted flying, and he flew for over 3 kilometers. After he stopped moving, Yixian felt dizzy. Meanwhile, the 2 Dao formation realm experts appeared in front of him again. Yixian's expression changed slightly, and he swung his sword horizontally. Bang! An expanse of sword light exploded apart, and then Yixian was blasted flying again. Meanwhile, the Dao ancestor suddenly appeared in front of Yixian, and he suddenly swung his fist at Yixian. Bang! The starry sky trembled as his fist smashed forward. Meanwhile, Yixian suddenly opened his palm, and then Sidu Tingyun's 10 strands of sword energy suddenly slashed forward. The Dao ancestor's expression changed drastically when he witnessed this scene, and he immediately retreated explosively. The other 2 Dao formation realm experts hurriedly retreated as well. Situ Tingyun's sword energy was capable of killing them. Yixian wiped off the blood on the corners of his mouth with a solemn expression on his face. Even though he'd attained the Dao defense realm, he was still unable to fight 3 enemies by himself. Should I activate the energy of my bloodline? Yixian slowly closed his eyes. The energy of his bloodline had gone completely berserk, and it was his final trump card. The Dao ancestor stared fixedly at Yixian from afar, and he was even more shocked by Yixian's physical body. Yixian had just suffered the full forced attacks of 2 Dao formation realm experts, yet he was still alive and well. What sort of physical body is this? Meanwhile, one of the Dao formation realm experts by the Dao ancestor's side spoke abruptly, "We can't delay any longer. If we continue to delay, then both our forces and the 5th dimension will suffer heavy losses. Moreover, I'm afraid an unexpected event might occur." The Dao ancestor turned around to look. At this moment, the experts of the 5th dimension were locked in battle with the experts of the doubting realm. If this continued, then both sides would suffer heavy losses. After all, the doubting realm had another enemy, and it was the Dao tomb. As for the 3 of them, although they could defeat Yixian, Yixian had the sword qi and Yixian's powerful physical body, so they wouldn't be able to kill Yixian in a short period of time. Thinking to this point, the Dao ancestor looked at Yixian. "Yixian, I originally prepared a big gift for the woman behind you, but since she won't appear, then I'll give it to you." As he spoke, he opened his palm, and the next moment, a golden light soared into the sky from the 34th layer of the doubting realm. In the blink of an eye, this golden light appeared in the starry sky of the 5th dimension. In an instant, the entire starry sky trembled. Inside that golden light was a god's seal. Inside that god's seal, an illusory figure gradually condensed. As this illusory figure condensed, a formless pressure enveloped the entire 5th dimension. Under this pressure, everyone felt like they were suffocating. Even Yi Xian felt a tightness in his chest at this moment, as if there were several mountains pressing down on him. On the other side, the Lord's expression also became incomparably solemn. The head of the 3,000 Great Daoists. Chapter 1408. 3,000 Great Daoists. The 3,000 Great Daoists represented 3,000 different Great Daoists. Of course, there were far more than 3,000 Great Daoists in the world. And among these Great Daoists, there were strong and weak ones. The first was the Great Tao of Destiny, the foremost of the 3,000 Great Daoists. The Tao ancestor didn't control the Great Tao of Destiny. However, someone in the doubting had once controlled the Great Tao, and that person was the founder of the doubting. Doubting's strongest trump card was not the two hidden Tao realm powerhouses, but the God's Seal. That was because the doubting ancestral souls were inside. This was doubting's last resort. Originally, he was saving it for the mysterious woman in a plain dress behind Yi Xian. However, the woman in a plain dress didn't show herself. For the sake of swiftly killing Yi Xian, he could only utilize this trump card first. In the distance, Yi Xian stared at the silhouette within the God's Seal. Although his countenance was calm, his heart was thundering with rage. Damn it, he's summoning the ancestor again? At this moment, everyone stopped what they were doing. There was no need to fight. If Yi Xian's side didn't have a heavyweight expert, then it would be over. It didn't take long for a woman to appear within the seal. The woman was dressed in a long black robe. Her features were picturesque, and she held a black folding fan in her hand. After the woman appeared, she looked around and looked at the Tao ancestor. However, as if she had discovered something, she suddenly turned to look at Yi Xian below. Seeing this scene, the Tao ancestor's expression suddenly changed. My ancestor knows this Yi Xian? Yi Xian was slightly stunned. This doubting ancestor knew him? In the air, the woman looked at Yi Xian. Tao form. Tao body. Upon hearing this, Yi Xian's expression instantly changed. Damn it, this woman doesn't recognize me, but she recognizes my Taoist form. The woman suddenly smiled and said, Interesting, I didn't expect someone to have cultivated a Tao body. How interesting. On the other side, the Tao ancestor bowed slightly to the woman. Ancestor, what is this Tao body? The woman glanced at the Tao ancestor. Did you summon me? The Tao ancestor quickly nodded. The woman turned to look at Yi Xian. She gently tapped the folding fan in her right hand on the palm of her left hand and said with a smile, You are also a protector. Yi Xian said nothing. The Tao ancestor's expression changed drastically. Just as he was about to speak, the woman suddenly said, To be able to cultivate a Tao body and possess a disaster cause. Young man, you are not simple at all. Yi Xian hurriedly said, To tell you the truth, I am the young sect master of Whirling Sect. The woman blinked. Whirling Sect? Are you sure? Yi Xian said seriously, Of course. The woman smiled and said, It just so happens that I am acquainted with the Whirling Sect's sect leader. Let me ask him. As she spoke, she turned her head and kissed him. Below Yi Xian, after a while, the woman turned her head and looked at Yi Xian. The Whirling Sect's sect master said that there's no such person as you. Yi Xian hesitated for a moment and said, Why don't we change the topic? The woman was stunned, and then she cracked a smile. It was like 100 flowers blooming, causing the starry sky to pale in comparison. At the side, the Tao ancestor said in a low voice, Ancestor, this person is a great enemy of my Taoing. The woman looked at the Tao ancestor. Don't speak for now. The Tao ancestor. The woman turned to look at Yi Xian and said with a smile, Not only did you cultivate a Tao body, you were also able to live until now despite having a disaster cause. The most important thing is the power of your bloodline. Your bloodline is the strongest power I have ever seen. Yi Xian hurriedly took out the sword spirit and the sword at the top of the pagoda. Senior, why don't you take a look at this? The woman glanced at the two swords and said with a smile, Are you threatening me? Yi Xian shook his head. Senior, not only do you doubting want to destroy me, but you also want to destroy my five-dimensional universe. Now, you have even invited you out. Tell me, who is threatening who? The woman turned to look at the Dao ancestor. You want to destroy this universe? The Dao ancestor's expression was somewhat ugly. The woman asked with a smile, as the guardian of the great Dao, shouldn't you be maintaining the balance and peace of the universe? The Dao ancestor's expression became even uglier. The woman looked at the Dao ancestor and the others below and said with a smile, it seems that you have turned the 3,000 great Dao into your personal tools. Hearing this, the expressions of all the doubting powerhouses below became extremely ugly. What a heart-wrenching remark. The woman looked at Dao Ting and the others. The great Dao once chose all of you. It's obvious that all of you are outstanding in some way. However, from the looks of it now, all of you are still going with the flow and have forgotten your original intentions. The Dao ancestor suddenly said, Ancestor, this Yi Xian is a great enemy of the doubting. This person once swore to destroy the doubting. The woman looked at the Dao ancestor and said with a smile, Can you tell me why he did this? The Dao ancestor was speechless. The woman said again, Everything has a reason. Why did he want to destroy the doubting? Can you tell me? The Dao ancestor was speechless. At this time, Yi Xian suddenly said, Why don't I tell you? The woman looked at Yi Xian and said with a smile, That's fine too. Yi Xian nodded. He told the whole story of the grudge between him and the doubting without adding any details. The atmosphere in the surroundings had become slightly strange. This woman was originally called out by the doubting to deal with Yi Xian. But now, this woman was listening to Yi Xian talk about the doubting. Whose ancestor was this? The Dao ancestor's face was gloomy. No one knew what he was thinking. On the other side, Rahu looked at the Great Lord. Great Lord, the Great Lord said softly, the Dao ancestor has miscalculated. Back then, the great Dao guardians of that generation were all impartial. Those people were righteous and paid attention to fairness in everything. Because of this, there were all kinds of orders in that era. As he said that, he looked at the Dao ancestor. He thought that the doubting ancestor would help him, but that's not the case. The doubting ancestor paid more attention to right and wrong. And this matter is obviously the doubting is not in the right. So, there's going to be a good show. At this time, Yi Xian stopped in the distance. The woman turned to look at the Dao ancestor. Did this little friend Yi slander the doubting? The Dao ancestor did not say anything. The woman suddenly waved her right hand. Under everyone's shocked gazes, the Dao ancestor was sent flying with a slap. He flew more than 10,000 feet, and when he came to a stop, his fleshly body became illusory. He shattered his body with a slap. Seeing this scene, everyone's expression changed. Yi Xian's expression also changed. Damn, how could this woman be so strong? If he were to be slapped, wouldn't his Daoist physique be destroyed? The woman turned to look at Yi Xian and said with a smile, This matter is the doubting's fault. On behalf of the doubting, I apologize to you and the entire fifth dimension. Everyone, Yi Xian was also dumbfounded. The enemy's biggest boss apologized to him? What was going on? Yi Xian hesitated for a while and then said, But shouldn't you be helping the doubting? The woman shook her head. Logically, I should be helping the doubting. But the doubting is not in the right. Yi Xian looked at the woman. You're being reasonable? The woman said with a smile, Why not? The 3,000 great Daos are a kind of order. As the guardian of the order, if you are unreasonable, who will obey the order? Yi Xian shook his head. In today's world, only fists matter, not reason. The woman looked at Yi Xian. Then, are you interested in rebuilding the order? Yi Xian looked at the woman. Do you want me to be the doubting master? The woman said with a smile, Can't I? Yi Xian shook his head. Senior, my mind is in a mess right now. The boss of the doubting master actually wanted him to be the doubting master. What was going on? The woman said with a smile, Do you have 5 Daoist scriptures on you? Yi Xian nodded. The woman said again, There should be 2 doubting masters. With these 2, you have 7. At this moment, the Lord suddenly said with a smile, My Dao tomb also has 1. With this 1, young Master Yi has 8. The woman looked at the Lord. The Lord bowed slightly. Greetings, ancestor. The woman said with a smile, "You used to be a doubting master?" The Lord nodded. "Yes. However, I rebelled later on, because doubting is not the doubting I once thought of. Of course, this has nothing to do with Ancestor. I admire what Ancestor did just now." The woman smiled and looked at Yixian. "As long as you nod, you can have 8 Daoist scriptures. So, what do you think?" Yixian looked at the woman. "Why did you choose me?" The woman blinked and said playfully, "Do you want to hear the truth or a lie?" Yixian thought for a while and said, "Lie first." The woman said with a smile, "You are a rare genius. With you, we can revitalize doubting and rebuild order." Yixian smiled. "What about the truth?" The woman looked at Yixian. "You have many backers." Yixian was speechless. The woman said again, "It is not particularly difficult to revitalize doubting. However, it is very difficult to gather all the Daoist scriptures and summon the great Dao spirit. To restore the 3,000 great Dao and rebuild order, we must gather all the Daoist scriptures and summon the great Dao spirit. However, ordinary people cannot do this." Yixian was puzzled. "Why is it so difficult?" The woman said with a smile, "There are 3 difficulties. First, the last Daoist scripture is in Whirling World. That place is not something you can provoke now. Second, many people will not let you gather all the Daoist scriptures. For example, Whirling World, Dark Abyss, and Ancient God Abyss. If these forces know that you have 8 Daoist scriptures, they will be jealous. Once they are jealous, you will be in danger. Third, even if you gather all 8 Daoist scriptures, the great Dao spirit may not recognize you. It might even kill you." Yixian was puzzled. "Why would it kill me?" The woman shook her head. "You will know this in the future. I can only tell you that it is very difficult to gather all the Daoist scriptures and get the great Dao spirit's recognition." Yixian said in a deep voice, "Senior, do you think I can get the great Dao spirit's recognition?" The woman blinked. "I don't know if she will recognize you. However, I know that she will not dare to kill you." Yixian frowned. "But," the woman said, "because you have many backers." Yixian was speechless. "P.S. Don't say that I am threatening you. If you don't give me the ticket, I will castrate myself." Chapter 1409. Many backers. Yixian was speechless. What was she talking about? In the starry sky, the woman smiled and said, "What if I don't agree?" Yixian looked at the woman and said, "What if I don't agree?" The woman blinked her eyes and said, "You will agree." Yixian smiled and said, "Why?" The woman said, "Because you have no reason to refuse." Yixian shook his head and said, "I only want to protect the 5-dimensional universe." The woman smiled and said, "If you want to protect the universe behind you, then become the doubting master and you will be able to protect it better." Yixian pointed at the doubting experts in the distance and said, "They will not accept me." The woman pointed at herself and said, "I approve of you." Yixian smiled and said, "Then can you make them approve of me?" The woman asked, "If I approve of you, will they dare to not approve of you?" Yixian was silent. The woman said again, "Young man, I don't have much time left." Yixian looked at the woman and she continued, "While I am still here, I can help you. Therefore, you must make a decision." Yixian was silent. The woman smiled and said, "I still have about a quarter of an hour. Want to walk with me?" Yixian thought about it and said, "Okay." The woman and Yixian walked towards the starry sky in the distance. In the field, the doubting experts looked at each other in dismay. The Dao ancestor who only had his soul left had a gloomy expression and no one knew what he was thinking. In the distant starry sky, the woman pointed and said, "In the distant starry sky, there is a mysterious force called the Ancient God Abyss. The weakest in this force is the Dao attainment realm, and there are experts above the Dao attainment realm." Yixian said in a deep voice, "Are they outside the Dao scripture?" The woman shook her head and said, "They are within the Dao scripture." Yixian frowned and said, "Experts above the Dao attainment realm are also within the Dao scripture?" The woman nodded and said, "Yes." Yixian was silent. He had underestimated this Dao scripture. The woman continued, "This power has been fighting against a mysterious power all year round. This mysterious power is called Dark Abyss. This place is very terrifying because a monstrous genius once appeared in this place. This person is called Second Brother Dao. Back then, he created a dark scripture based on the Dao scripture. Yi Xian frowned. Secret scripture? The woman nodded. It was created according to the Dao scripture. The people of the dark world all cultivate the dark scripture. As far as I know, they have two goals. First, they want to destroy the Dao scripture martial arts civilization and make the dark scripture martial arts civilization the only one. Second, they want to destroy the great Dao spirit. As she spoke, she looked at Xianxia. Do you know why the Dao scripture is divided into 9 parts? Yi Xian shook his head. The woman replied, because the Dao scripture was destroyed by the people of the Dark Abyss. Yi Xian was speechless. The woman suddenly asked, are you willing to give up on the Dao scriptures? Yi Xian was silent. The woman smiled and said, looks like you are not willing to give up. Actually, if I were you, I wouldn't give up either. But because even if you give up, they might not let you go. In this world, being weak is a mistake and a sin. Yi Xian gave a thumbs up. Senior's words are brilliant. The woman laughed and gently fanned Yi Xian's head. Don't play tricks. I told you so much because I want to tell you that you will always be the Dao scripture. One day, you will face the Dark Abyss. If you become the Lord of the Doubting, the forces you control will become even stronger. After all, the Doubting's overall forces are still very strong, right? It's very strong, right? Yi Xian was silent. The woman continued. Moreover, if you become the Lord of the Doubting, you will immediately have 2 Dao scriptures. Apart from that, I can give you a surprise. Yi Xian was curious. Surprise? The woman smiled and said, it is in the 34th heaven of the Doubting. Yi Xian looked at the woman. Senior, you really want me to become the Lord of the Doubting. Why is that? The woman smiled and did not say anything. Yi Xian said, Senior, can you tell me the truth? The woman nodded and looked at Yi Xian. There is a bad karma between you and the Doubting. I want to turn this bad karma into good karma. Of course, I feel that you are also the hope to save the Doubting. After all, the Doubting now is not the Doubting of the past. However, I feel that even if you cannot restore order to this world, you should be able to make the Doubting better. Yi Xian looked at the woman and did not say anything. The woman smiled and said, otherwise, what do you think I am scheming? Yi Xian shook his head. I don't know. The woman continued to walk forward. My generation has sacrificed too much for the order of this world. I don't want to see the Doubting continue to decline, and I don't want to see the Doubting perish. Yi Xian asked, Senior, have you fallen? The woman smiled and did not say anything. Yi Xian asked again, no? The woman smiled and said, you care a lot about me? Yi Xian was speechless. The woman stopped and looked at Yi Xian. How is it? Have you thought it through? Yi Xian was silent. At this moment, the woman suddenly said, Nian Nian. Yi Xian looked at the woman. The woman smiled and said, that 5th dimension Tendo is still alive, right? Yi Xian said in a deep voice, what do you mean, Senior? The woman looked at Yi Xian. Do you really think that her death was because of my doubting? Yi Xian clenched his fists. What do you mean, Senior? The woman smiled and said, she did not die because of doubting. She died because of you. Yi Xian stared at the woman. Why do you say that? The woman pointed at Yi Xian. The cause of calamity. She has helped you too much. Not only did she help you too much, but she also forcefully interfered with your cause of calamity, helping you block some of the calamity karma that originally belonged to you. In short, you just need to understand one thing. The cause of calamity on you is not as simple as you think. You want to protect the entire 5th dimension, so your cause of calamity is very likely to implicate the entire 5th dimension. Yi Xian said, then, Senior, aren't you afraid that I will implicate doubting? The woman smiled and said, there are no absolutes in everything. You can cause the 5th dimension and doubting to perish together, but you can also cause the 5th dimension and doubting to become even more powerful. Yi Xian was silent. The woman opened her palm, and a god's seal appeared in her hand. She handed the god's seal to Yi Xian. This is the first of the 3,000 Grand Daos, the Grand Dao of Destiny. It will fuse with you, allowing you to slowly comprehend the Dao of Destiny. You will also be able to use it to achieve Dao in a short period of time. Dao realm. Yi Xian was silent. The woman continued, if you want to protect the fifth dimension and protect your sister Nian, you will need to obtain even more power. Yi Xian softly said, it seems that I am being unreasonable. As he spoke, he received the god's seal. The woman smiled and said, it is not unreasonable, but you are very cautious. If I am not wrong, you should be afraid that I will plot against you. I can also tell you that I am indeed plotting against you. Yi Xian looked at the woman and said, Senior, will we meet in the future? The woman smiled and said, it is up to you. At this moment, Yi Xian knew that the woman in front of him was not dead. The woman continued, let me tell you a piece of bad news. The whirling world should already know that you have the 5 Dao scriptures. Yi Xian was struck dumb. Then he asked, why? The woman looked at Yi Xian and smiled and said, because I have communicated with the whirling world before. With the strength of the whirling world, they should be able to sense the aura of the 5 Dao scriptures. After all, you were so close to me at that time. Yi Xian, the woman smiled and said, this is the price you have to pay for deceiving me. Lying has a price. Yi Xian's face was full of black lines. The woman glanced at her body. At this moment, her body was quickly becoming illusory. The woman smiled and said, it is going to disappear. Do you have any questions? If there is, I will answer them if I can. Yi Xian asked in a deep voice, where is Senior now? The woman shook her head, I can't answer. Yi Xian frowned slightly, why? The woman smiled and said, there is no why, I just can't answer. You can ask the next question. Of course, you can also choose not to ask. Yi Xian thought for a moment and said, how should I address you, Senior? The woman looked at Yi Xian and smiled meaningfully, what do you want to do? Yi Xian hurriedly said, I don't mean anything else. I just want to ask, you can't answer this? The woman laughed and said, there is no harm in telling you. My name is Zhao Jiqing. Most people call me Qingzhu. In fact, very few people know my real name. Zhao Jiqing. Yi Xian nodded slightly, I will remember it. The woman looked at Yi Xian and smiled, I have 2 bad news. Do you want to hear it? Bad news. Yi Xian frowned slightly, what bad news? The woman said, the first bad news is that the Daoist ancestor ran away. Yi Xian frowned slightly. The woman said softly, the second bad news is that someone helped him escape. And this person should be someone from the dark world. Of course, there is even worse news. The 2 Taoist scriptures were taken away by the Daoist ancestor. Yi Xian immediately jumped up, Senior, why didn't you stop them? The woman was a little helpless, I talked too much with you. Yi Xian, the woman smiled and said, don't be angry. What is yours is still yours. What is not yours, you can't take it away. After saying that, her lower body disappeared. Yi Xian said in a deep voice, Senior, can I call the ancestor in the future? Can I summon you to help me? The woman blinked her eyes, I'm afraid not. Yi Xian was a little puzzled, why? The woman smiled and said, do you want to hear the truth or a lie? Yi Xian said in a deep voice, what is the lie? The woman said seriously, the lie is that this is the last clone I left here. But now, this clone will disappear completely. So, Yi Xian was a little curious, what is the truth? The woman looked at Yi Xian and grinned, the truth is that I don't want to have too much contact with you. I am afraid of bad luck. So, I refuse your summoning. Bye-bye. After saying that, she disappeared. In the air, Yi Xian was petrified. Chapter 1410. In the starry sky, Yi Xian stood quietly, deep in thought. It was very dramatic. He did not expect that he would become the Lord of Daoting. At this time, the Lord and the others suddenly appeared beside Yi Xian. The Lord smiled. Do you feel like it's a dream? Yi Xian nodded. A little. The Lord laughed. I also feel like it's a dream. Just a moment ago, Yi Xian and Doubting were mortal enemies. Now, Yi Xian had become the Lord of Doubting. This Dao ancestor's summoning directly killed himself and gave Doubting to Yi Xian. This operation was really rare. Yi Xian suddenly said, "Senior, is there a big difference between the Doubting of the past and the Doubting of the present?" The Lord smiled. "There is no comparison at all. The great Tao was once complete and there was order in the world. Good will be rewarded and evil will be punished. The reason why it could be like this was because the great Tao guardians of Doubting were impartial and impartial. At that time, no one dared to practice favoritism because if they did, not only would they be deprived of their deity position, but they would also fall into the evil path of reincarnation. In that era, the price of doing evil was very high. Therefore, the great Tao guardians basically did not dare to do evil." Yi Xian frowned. "Then why did Doubting become like this?" The Lord said, "Because Qing Zhu and the others disappeared." Yi Xian was puzzled. "Disappeared? Left?" The Lord said softly, "They should have left. Anyway, after that group of people left, the people behind them began to take over Doubting. Unknowingly, Doubting began to slowly deteriorate. Originally, the Tao master position of Doubting was for the virtuous, but later on, this position became the private property of some people. They only passed it on to their own sons and it was passed down from generation to generation, including the Tao ancestor just now. The reason why he could become the Lord of Doubting was because his father was the previous Tao ancestor." Yi Xian was silent. The Lord laughed. "Now that you are the Lord of Doubting, you can change Doubting. Also, be careful of the Tao ancestor. He should have been rescued by the people from the dark abyss." "An abyss?" Yi Xian said solemnly. "The people from the dark abyss saved him because of the 2 scriptures, right?" The Lord nodded. "Yes. After that, and Yuan will probably come looking for you." Yi Xian was speechless. The Lord flicked his finger and a Daoist scripture appeared in front of Yi Xian. It was the 6th scripture. The Lord smiled and said, "I'll give it to you. If you have time, come to the Tao tomb to play." With that he turned around and left. Yi Xian looked at the scripture in his hands, speechless. The Lord was definitely afraid that the people from the dark abyss would come looking for him. That was why he gave the Tao scripture to him so easily. An abyss. Yi Xian was silent for a moment before he turned around and left. Somewhere in the starry sky, Su Ke looked away after Yi Xian left. In fact, he had come to the 5th dimension a long time ago. However, he did not make a move. He wanted to act at the crucial moment. He did not expect that after the Doubting ancestor came out, the Doubting ancestor would stand on Yi Xian's side. He did not expect this at all. Of course, he did not expect that an Yuan would save the Tao ancestor. This meant that an Yuan would become enemies with Yi Xian. Thinking of this, Su Ke wanted to laugh. Su Ke suddenly said, "Stay here and protect young Master Yi. I will return to the ancient god abyss." With that he turned around and left. On the other side, the Tao ancestor, who was already a soul body, stood in the starry sky. Not far in front of him stood a middle-aged man in a black robe. The Tao ancestor looked at the middle-aged man in front of him. "And Yuan?" The middle-aged man smiled. "You guessed it right. You can call me Lien Zun." The Tao ancestor was expressionless. "You saved me for the 2 scriptures?" Lien Zun smiled. "Will you give them to me?" The Tao ancestor laughed at himself. "Can I refuse?" With that, he flicked his finger and 2 scriptures appeared in front of Lien Zun. Lien Zun did not refuse and kept the 2 scriptures. At this moment, the Tao ancestor suddenly said, "Yi Xian has 5 of them." Lien Zun glanced at the Tao ancestor and smiled. "You want us to kill Yi Xian?" The Tao ancestor smiled. "You wanted to go, didn't you?" Lien Zun looked at the starry sky and said softly, "To be honest, we are here for Yi Xian. As far as we know, he is related to the Sword Sect, and the Sword Sect has a blood feud with an Yuan." The Tao ancestor frowned. "Blood feud?" Lien Zun said softly, "Back then, the Sword Sect's ancestral master, that female sword cultivator, not only killed dozens of our Dark Abyss experts, but she also brought her sword to our Dark Abyss. At this point, He didn't say anything else. That incident back then could be said to be the dark abyss humiliation. The Dao ancestor looked at Lien Zun. I have to remind you that there is a little girl by Yixian's side. Her name is Moon Yanyan. Her strength is beyond your imagination. If you want to obtain the scriptures and kill Yixian, you must be quick. Otherwise, once she regains her memory and strength, you will be like ants before her. Lien Zun said softly, are you talking about the Moon Yanyan who shattered your body with less than 30% of her strength? The Dao ancestor said, yes. Lien Zun was silent. Coming to this place this time, many things and people were beyond his expectations. Especially Yixian. Yixian's strength shocked him. Although he was at the Dao controlling realm, Yixian could totally become a Dao realm expert. Most importantly, Yixian's bloodline power and body were too terrifying. The Dao ancestor was about to speak, but Lien Zun smiled and said, you don't have to sow discord. We will kill Yixian because he is not only related to the sword sect, but also to the ancient god Abyss. Therefore he must die. He shook his head and smiled. To be honest, there are too many reasons to kill him. The Dao ancestor slowly closed his eyes. At this moment, he was the most indignant and aggrieved. He had been holding back his ultimate move, but he did not expect that it would not only destroy him, but also help Yixian. Of course, he did not expect that the ancestor of doubting would not help doubting, but Yixian. And he even made Yixian the master of doubting. Every time he thought of this, his liver ached. Angry. At this moment, Lien Zun suddenly said, Dao ancestor, are you willing to go to the dark abyss? If you are, we will help you to restore your body. The Dao ancestor said softly, do I have the right to refuse? Lien Zun laughed. Then we will be on the same side from now on. Let's go. After saying this, he turned and left. The Dao ancestor turned and looked at the starry sky of the fifth dimension. His eyes gradually turned cold. Yixian, we will meet again. After saying this, he turned and left. Yixian returned to the starry sky of the fifth dimension. At this moment, some of the people of doubting had left. Bai Dizzy had also disappeared, but White Robe was still there. Yixian walked in front of the doubting experts. Everyone was looking at Yixian. In fact, at this moment, they were already confused. They were originally enemies with Yixian, but with the appearance of their ancestor, everything changed. The ancestor approved of Yixian. Could it be that they wanted to become enemies with the ancestor? At this moment, White Robe suddenly walked in front of Yixian. He looked at Yixian without saying a word. Yixian suddenly smiled. If you want to stay, you can stay. If you don't want to, you can leave immediately. None of the doubting experts moved. Where could they go? At this moment, Yixian opened his palm. A god's seal appeared in his hand. The great Dao of destiny. The expressions of the three Dao completion realm experts instantly became extremely complicated when they witnessed this scene. Their ancestor had passed this great Dao seal to Yixian. At this moment, Venerable Me suddenly said, Your Excellency, did the ancestor say anything? Yixian looked at Venerable Me. She said that I should go find her in the future. Venerable Me was stunned, then bowed slightly. This old man is willing to serve your excellency as my master. The other two doubting experts bowed slightly as well. When they saw the three doubting experts bow, some of the doubting experts who were watching hurriedly bowed as well. The strongest three had already expressed their allegiance, so they naturally wouldn't hesitate any longer. Yixian slowly closed his eyes. It's time for the doubting to change. Venerable Me hesitated for a moment and said, I'm afraid it'll be difficult. Yixian gazed at Venerable Me. Do you want to change? Venerable Me replied, Rome wasn't built in a single day. Yixian smiled. Do you know why Big Sister Qing is so strong? Venerable Me was stunned. Big Sister Qing? Yixian's expression didn't change. She asked me to call her Big Sister, and she said that she'll protect me from now on. Is there a problem? Venerable Me replied, I have no problem. Yixian glanced at the doubting experts. Finally, he looked at White Robe. White Robe, do you think the doubting should change? White Robe looked at Yixian. You want me to submit? Yi Xian smiled. I don't want you to submit. However, I want to say that you don't have to fight for me. You can continue to fight for the doubting. White Robe was silent. Yi Xian asked, make your own decision. White Robe looked at Yi Xian. Bai Dizzy asked me to follow you. Bai Dizzy? Yi Xian frowned slightly. He looked around. Where is he? White Robe said indifferently, he knows that you'll kill him, so he ran. Yi Xian was silent. He really wanted to kill Bai Dizzy. It was this person who had targeted him time and time again. White Robe continued. He said that the ancestor chose you for 3 reasons. First, the ancestors saw the strength of the person behind you. The strength of the person behind you is definitely beyond our imagination. Second, the ancestor wanted to end the bad karma between you and the doubting, and turn this bad karma into good karma. Third, the ancestor chose you because she wanted you to change the doubting and rebuild the order of the great Tao. In other words, she felt that you could change the doubting and rebuild the order of the great Tao. Yi Xian was silent. White Robe continued, he also said that I cannot fight for you, but I can continue to fight for the doubting. And if you, Yi Xian, can gather the Tao scriptures, it will be a great thing for me and the whole of the doubting. So, saying that, he looked at Yi Xian. I will fight for the doubting. Chapter 14:11. Fight for doubting. Following White Robe's declaration, the doubting powerhouses under him also declared their allegiance. In the doubting, White Robe's prestige was second only to the Tao ancestor, especially in the celestial abyss, where his White Robe army was invincible. And these people were even more loyal to White Robe than to the Tao ancestor. With White Robe and the others' submission, the entire doubting was now truly under Yi Xian's control. At this time, Luo Ho and the others walked over. He looked at Yi Xian and smiled. Congratulations. The current Yi Xian could be said to be on equal footing with the Dao Tomb land. No, with Yi Xian's participation, the doubting strength could completely suppress the Dao Tomb land. Yi Xian smiled. Senior Luo Ho, the cooperation I've discussed with the Dao Tomb land is still valid. Luo Ho's heart immediately relaxed. He smiled. That's good. Yi Xian looked up into the depths of the starry sky and said softly, To doubting. To doubting. He did not forget that Zhao Jiqing had left him a surprise in the 34th heaven. Soon, Yi Xian left the 5th dimension with everyone and headed for the doubting. In the starry sky, Luo Ho and the others watched Yi Xian and the others leave with complicated expressions. They never imagined that Yi Xian would directly become the master of the doubting. Fortunately, Yi Xian did not become enemies with the Dao Tomb land. Otherwise, the Dao Tomb land would be in an awkward situation. After a moment, Luo Ho said, Let's go. With that, he turned and left with Qi Yao Yao and the others. Doubting. Yi Xian once again came to the doubting. Unlike before, this time, he came openly. Yi Xian headed straight for the 34th level of heaven. On the way, Yi Xian suddenly asked, Do you know what's inside the 34th heaven? Beside Yi Xian, venerated Mi shook his head. We only know that it is the place where the great Dao seal is stored. We don't know anything else. Yi Xian looked at Venerable Mi. You've never been inside? Venerable Mi nodded. I've never entered before. Yi Xian was puzzled. Why? Venerable Mi hesitated for a moment and said, I wouldn't dare to disturb you, ancestor. Upon hearing this, Yi Xian understood. In the hearts of the doubting people, Zhao Jiqing's position was still very high. Soon, Yi Xian arrived at the entrance to the 34th heaven. Back then, Sister Nian had come here, but she hadn't entered. Now that he thought about it, Sister Nian must have felt Zhao Jiqing's presence. Sister Nian's strength was definitely not weaker than Zhao Jiqing's, but at that time, Sister Nian only had less than 30% of her strength. Moreover, Sister Nian's main target was the Dao ancestor. Yi Xian collected his thoughts and walked towards the 34th heaven. Venerable Mi and the rest did not follow. Soon, Yi Xian arrived at the 34th heaven. The entire 34th heaven was empty. There was nothing there. Yi Xian was stunned. Could it be that Zhao Jiqing was lying to him? At this moment, not far from Yi Xian, the space suddenly trembled. Then, a black box floated out of the space. The box. Yi Xian's expression was a little strange. Could this box also contain a little white guy? Yi Xian opened the box. Inside the box was a circular black and white seal. The seal was half black and half white. Yi Xian picked up the seal and studied it. He frowned. What was this thing? Yi Xian studied it for a long time but still could not figure it out. Hence, he picked up the seal and left the 34th heaven. Yi Xian handed the seal to Venerable Me. This is. When he saw the black and white seal, this chapter is not finished. Please flip the page. When the seal appeared, Venerable Me's expression changed. Yi Xian knew that Venerable Me recognized this black and white seal. Venerable Me said solemnly, "This is a Dao seal." Dao seal? Yi Xian was curious. What is a Dao seal? Venerable Me looked at Yi Xian with a complicated expression. A Dao seal? Yi Xian asked again, what's its use? Venerable Me hesitated and shook his head. I don't know either. Yi Xian was speechless. After talking for so long, this guy still did not know the use of this Dao seal. Venerable Me said again, although I don't know the use of this item, it is my doubting treasure. It has a spirit. Young friend, why don't you communicate with it? Perhaps you will gain something. The spirit of the Dao seal. Yi Xian nodded. He looked at the Dao seal. Let's talk? No response. Yi Xian smiled. Then he put the Dao seal back into the box. At this moment, an angry voice came from the box. Let me out. Yi Xian smirked. He opened the box and the Dao seal floated out. At the same time, a little boy floated out from the Dao seal. The little boy looked about 5 or 6 years old. He had a pigtail and looked very cute. Yi Xian looked at the little boy. How should I address you? The little boy looked at Yi Xian and did not speak. Yi Xian smiled. I'm Yi Xian. What about you? The little boy snorted. I'm not telling you. Yi Xian laughed. I know even if you don't tell me. You're little Yin, right? The little boy frowned. How did you know? Yi Xian's expression froze. Damn, this guy is really called Little Yin? Who gave him that name? He's as good as me. Little Yin looked at Yi Xian. Why did you call me out? Yi Xian blinked and smiled. I just wanted to ask. Are you strong? Little Yin snorted. Of course I'm strong. Yi Xian pointed at Venerated Me. Can you beat him? Venerated Me. Little Yin looked at Venerated Me. He hesitated and shook his head. I can't beat him. Yi Xian chuckled. Looks like you're not that strong after all. Little Yin immediately said angrily, Who said that? Let me tell you. I'm very, very strong. Yi Xian shrugged and did not speak. But his expression said, I don't believe you. Little Yin suddenly put his palms together. The next moment he turned into a black light and entered between Yi Xian's brows. Boom! Yi Xian's body trembled violently. The next moment, a powerful aura swept out from his body. This aura was so strong that Venerated Me and the others around him were forced to retreat. In an instant, the doubting experts around Yi Xian were sent flying thousands of feet away. A huge black and white Tai Chi diagram appeared beneath Yi Xian's feet. At this moment, Yi Xian was a little confused. What the hell was this? Little Yin suddenly said, You fight him. Yi Xian looked at Venerated Me in the distance. He opened his palm and the Executing Heaven Sword appeared. As soon as the Executing Heaven Sword appeared, a Tai Chi diagram appeared above Venerated Me's head. With the appearance of this Tai Chi diagram, Venerated Me's realm was suppressed to Dao Defense Realm. From Dao Attainment Realm to Dao Defense Realm. Meanwhile, Yi Xian's aura skyrocketed. Although he did not directly reach Dao Attainment Realm, his aura skyrocketed endlessly. It was infinitely close to the Dao Defense Realm. It wasn't just Yi Xian who was stunned, everyone else here was as well. What the hell is this? Why is it so abnormal? Meanwhile, Venerated Me spoke abruptly. This chapter isn't finished. Please continue to the next page. I understand. It's used for support. Yi Xian fell silent. He understood it now. The seal of the Grand Dao was a divine treasure of support. It could suppress his opponents and strengthen himself. He didn't have to fear Dao Attainment Realm experts anymore with it in his possession. Or it should be said that Dao Attainment Realm experts should be afraid of him. Meanwhile, little Yin grunted coldly, "I'm amazing, right?" Yixian smiled, "Amazing. Extremely amazing." Little Yin left Yixian and gazed at Yixian. "Can you let me go?" Yixian blinked and said, "Can't you leave by yourself?" Little Yin lowered his head slightly. "You have that seal on you." Yixian understood. The seal of a god. This seal was bound by the seal of a god. He tried to contact the seal of a god, and sure enough, he sensed little Yin through it. Xiao Yin continued, "That woman, she used that broken seal to trap me." As he spoke, he gazed at Yixian. "Can you let me go?" Yixian didn't speak. He just opened his palm, and some violet energy appeared in his hand. Little Yin's eyes lit up when he saw the violet energy, and he blinked. "Can you give it to me?" Yixian smiled, "Of course." As soon as he finished speaking, he pointed with a finger, and the violet energy surged towards little Yin. Little Yin instantly revealed an intoxicated expression after absorbing the violet energy, and then he gazed at Yixian. "Do you have more?" Yixian said with a smile, "No more today." Little Yin blinked. "You mean there will be more tomorrow?" Yixian gave him a thumbs up. "Smart. How about this? You follow me, and I'll give you 30 strands of this violet energy every day. What do you think?" Little Yin hesitated and then said, "Do you want me to follow you and help you fight?" Yixian nodded. "I want you to follow me, but not to help me fight. You follow me, and when I'm in trouble, you just need to help me a little. What do you think?" Little Yin looked at Yixian. "Let me think about it, okay?" Yixian smiled. "I'll give you 50 strands of violet energy every day. On top of that, I'll give you 1,000 fortune divine crystals every day." As he spoke, he took out a pile of fortune divine crystals and placed them in front of little Yin. He knew that the fortune divine crystal was useful to these spiritual beasts. Little Yin glanced at the fortune divine crystals, and he was very tempted. Yixian smiled. "I'm a good person and I don't usually fight." "Revered me." Little Yin looked at Yixian, and he was still a little hesitant. Yixian suddenly took out a stick of Tonghulu and handed it to little Yin. Little Yin was a little curious. "What is this?" Yixian opened the parchment, and then handed it to little Yin. "Lick it." Little Yin hesitated, and then licked the Tonghulu. Soon, his eyes widened in disbelief. "What is this?" Yixian said with a straight face, "Tonghulu." Little Yin licked it again, and he was very excited, or rather a little emotional, because he had never eaten something like this before. A moment later, little Yin looked at Yixian and said excitedly, "I can follow you, but you have to give me a stick of Tonghulu every day." Yixian, seeing that Yixian did not speak, little Yin hurriedly said, "Half will do. Half a stick, no less." Yixian, at the side, revered me and the others could not bear to watch any. Yixian, devoid of conscience. P.S. Monthly ticket? I don't want it. End of this chapter. Chapter 1412. Just like that, Yixian had succeeded in leaving behind the seal. And with the existence of this seal, the current Yixian could be said to not be afraid of Dao realm powerhouses at all. After subduing the seal, Yixian looked up. There were 2 more levels after the 34th level. There were a total of 36 levels. What would the last 2 levels contain? Meanwhile, Venerated Me seemed to have read Yixian's mind, and he said abruptly, "Daoist Master, the spirit tablets of our doubting ancestors are all within the 35 levels, and it's also their resting place. There's nothing else. As for the 36 levels, there's a super formation within them. It's our doubting sect's protective formation, and it'll only be activated when the doubting sect is in danger." Yixian looked at Venerated Me. "There aren't any other treasures?" Venerated Me laughed bitterly. "There really isn't." Yixian nodded slightly. "Then forget it." With that, he turned around and left. Meanwhile, Venerated Me suddenly said, "Daoist Master, aren't you going to be doubting?" Yixian glanced at them and smiled. "How about this? I won't be the doubting master, and all of you can make the doubting decisions yourselves. What do you think? Everyone was stunned when they heard that. Venerated Me hurriedly said, absolutely not. Since the ancestor made you the Daoist master, then you are the Daoist master. No one can change that. Doubting ancestor? What kind of person was that? Since she made Yi Xian the doubting master, then there was definitely a deeper meaning behind it. Moreover, after interacting with Yi Xian, they realized that Yi Xian really wasn't simple. If Yi Xian didn't become the doubting master now, then the doubting sect would be without a leader, and its future would be worrying. Yi Xian thought for a moment and said, all of you will listen to what I say, right? Venerable Me quickly nodded. Of course. Yi Xian looked at Venerable Me, I want to rebuild the order of heaven and earth, but doubting all of us have to make changes. Venerable Me hesitated and said, that's a good thing, but Yi Xian suddenly asked, Venerable Me, do you know why my sister, Lord Qing, is so powerful? Venerable Me looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian walked in front of Venerable Me and said softly, because she has not forgotten her original intention. Venerable Me, you are also a guardian of the great Tao, but do you know that your path has gone astray? If I'm not wrong, you have not been in contact with the God's seal in your body for many years? Venerable Me was silent. The God's seal did not leave, but it had been dormant for many years. However, he did not care about it. With his current strength, he basically did not need to use the God's seal. Yi Xian looked at Venerable Me, Senior, do you know why those in the past were able to reach Tao realization, but you all were stuck at Tao realization, unable to advance? Venerable Me slowly clenched his fists. It's a matter of faith. Yi Xian nodded. When Lord Qing came out, he said something that Senior should remember. That is, in the end, things have changed. Senior should know the meaning of this, right? Venerable Me was silent. Of course he knew. This meant that the doubting of today was no longer the doubting of the past. Yi Xian looked at Venerable Me, rebuild order, let the 3,000 Daoists shine again, let the world have order again. Senior, if Lord Qing and the others could do it, why can't we? He knew that if he wanted to truly control doubting, he needed the support of Venerable Me and the other two. This was because the three of them were Tao attainment realm cultivators from the Tao court. With their support, anything he wanted to do would be simple. Venerable Me was silent for a long time. Then he said, I understand Tao Master's meaning. Whatever Tao Master wants to do, do it. The three of us will support you with all our strength. Yi Xian nodded. That's good. Saying so, he looked around. Senior, what do you think of the fifth dimension? Venerable Me said solemnly, very good. Yi Xian smiled. I want to start with the fifth dimension. To establish a relatively fair order in the fifth dimension, what do you think? Venerable Me thought about it. That's not a problem. However, to re-establish order, I'm afraid it'll be a bit difficult. Yi Xian smiled. It's not difficult. As long as we work together, it's not difficult at all. Venerable Me wanted to say something but stopped. Yi Xian smiled. Does Senior want to say that it might affect some people's interests? Venerable Me nodded. Currently, the Tao court was fighting for themselves. If they were to establish order now, it would be equivalent to fighting for others. Moreover, they would definitely have to give up some things. Many people would definitely be unwilling to do so. Yi Xian looked at Venerable Me. If they're not like-minded, then ask them to leave. Hearing this, Venerable Me's heart trembled. He nodded. Understood. Yi Xian glanced at everyone present, and then he said, everyone, head to the fifth dimension. At the side, White Robe suddenly said, Heaven Abyss. Yi Xian looked at White Robe. No. White Robe was stunned. Yi Xian turned and left. In the future, I will give you salaries. Everyone's salaries will be doubled. Everyone was stunned when they heard this. Double the increase? Is this true? Everyone looked at each other. Just like that, all the doubting powerhouses headed to the fifth dimension. In the fifth dimension, Yi Xian asked Guan Yin to build a Tao city. This Tao city was filled with doubting powerhouses. As for Heaven Abyss, the doubting completely withdrew and gave Heaven Abyss to the Tao tomb. This caused the Tao tomb to be slightly stunned. What was Yi Xian doing? After returning to the fifth dimension, Yi Xian immediately called Sanxing, Guanyin, and Venerable Me. Yi Xian looked at Sanxing. Sanxing, are you willing to return to the underworld? Sanxing was stunned. Then he shook his head. This place is quite fun. Yi Xian smiled. If you don't want to go back, then forget it. Saying this, he looked at Venerable Me. Venerable Me, who do you think should guard the underworld? To rebuild order, the underworld was crucial. Venerable Me thought about it. To rebuild the underworld, we need a trustworthy person. Moreover, this person's ability must be outstanding. Yi Xian looked at Guanyin. In fact, Guanyin's ability was good, but she was not suitable. Her strength was still lacking. Moreover, this side needed Guanyin. If Guanyin left, this side would be in chaos. Venerable Me suddenly said, I have a candidate, but I'm afraid you. Yi Xian asked, Who? Venerable Me said in a deep voice, Bai Dizzy. Hearing this, Yi Xian was stunned. He had almost forgotten about this old man. Damn, this old man was definitely capable. However, he did not have a good impression of this old man. Venerable Me said, as the head of the Celestial Lords, Bai Dizzy has been helping the previous Dao ancestor manage the doubting. If he were to manage the underworld, it would be a piece of cake for him. Yi Xian thought about it. Then he said, choose someone else. Venerable Me was stunned. He looked at Yi Xian and did not speak. Yi Xian smiled. With his talent, it is a waste of his talent to manage the underworld. Hearing this, Venerable Me heaved a sigh of relief. He thought that Yi Xian wanted to kill Bai Dizzy. Venerable Me said, then let Sir God Yin Ming go to the underworld. He was once the liaison between the doubting and the underworld, so he is familiar with the underworld. Moreover, he is strong enough. Yi Xian nodded. All right. As he spoke, he looked at Sanxing. Sanxing, the spirit of the underworld is following you, right? Sanxing's expression changed slightly. She hurriedly shook her head. No, no. Yi Xian said with a smile, really? Sanxing said softly, can you let her go? Yi Xian smiled. I won't kill her. I need her help. Sanxing blinked. What help? Yi Xian said, let her return to the underworld. If there is no spirit of the underworld, will it still be called the underworld? Sanxing hesitated for a moment. I don't know if she will go back. Yi Xian smiled. She will definitely go back. Because the underworld is her home. Sanxing nodded. I'll talk to her. But if she doesn't want to go back, you can't force her. Yi Xian said with a smile, great. Sanxing turned and left. At this moment, Yi Xian asked again, Venerable Me, do you know where Bai Dizzy is? Venerable Me nodded. I do. Yi Xian said, how about this? Tell him to do something for me. Venerable Me asked, what is it? Yi Xian said, ask him to help find those with the God seal. Find them and bring them back. As long as they are willing to return, they will receive a monthly salary. Venerable Me smiled. That won't be a problem. He's in charge of the doubting. He's the best when it comes to these messy matters. Yi Xian nodded. Go do what you need to do. Venerable Me bowed slightly and turned to leave. Only Yi Xian and Guanyin were left in the hall. Guanyin said in a deep voice, you really want to establish order? Yi Xian nodded. Guanyin was puzzled. But Yi Xian said softly, the current fifth dimension is so harmonious because of me. But what if I'm not there? Guanyin was silent. Without Yi Xian, the fifth dimension would be in chaos. Because no one could suppress it. Yi Xian said softly, I want to establish order. An order that everyone follows. Even without me, the fifth dimension will not be in chaos. At least not for a certain period of time. Of course, there's nothing wrong with a new order. At least, this world will become a better place. If it was in the past, he would definitely not do this. But now, he was willing to do it. Because the fifth dimension was the universe that Sister Nian was protecting. He, Yi Xian, wanted to protect the fifth dimension. Protecting the fifth dimension was equivalent to protecting Sister Nian. He had promised Sister Nian. Ancient God Abyss. After Su Ku returned to the ancient god Abyss, at the top of a pyramid, Su Zhe looked at Su Ku. You're saying that the people from the Dark Abyss want to kill Yi Xian? Su Ku nodded. Young Master Yi not only has the Tao scripture, but he's also related to Situ Tingyun from the Sword Sect. And the Dark Abyss has a blood feud with Situ Tingyun, so... Su Zhe suddenly laughed. The Dark Abyss? This old man is dying from laughter. No, let's take a break. Ha, Su Ku. Chapter 1413. In the Fifth Dimension. In the Sword Hall, Yi Xian sat cross-legged on the ground, stabilizing his realm. He had reached the Tao-controlling realm during the battle, but his realm was still unstable. What he needed to do now was to stabilize his realm and familiarize himself with the Tao-controlling realm. After reaching the Tao-controlling realm, he felt that the greatest improvement was in his body. This was something he had not expected. He was now at the Tao-controlling realm, and his body was also at the Tao-controlling realm. It could be said that he could fight Tao Attainment Realm experts without using any external items. With the addition of that strange Tao seal, he now had the ability to kill a Tao Attainment Realm expert. In the hall, as Yi Xian stabilized his realm, his aura became more and more stable. In the end, his aura disappeared and he seemed to have merged with heaven and earth. After the Daoting entered the fifth dimension was unprecedentedly powerful. In addition, the spirit qi in the entire fifth dimension was getting denser. This was because the fifth dimension didn't just have the spirit qi of heaven and earth. There were also the super mineral veins that Yi Xian brought from the dark world. These super mineral veins were not only used to produce fortune crystals but also contained extremely pure spirit qi. With these mineral veins, the spirit qi in the fifth dimension became even denser. Of course, there was another reason why the spirit qi in the fifth dimension was so dense. It was because the experts of the fifth dimension were protecting it. In the fifth dimension, destroying spirit qi and origin was a serious crime. In short, the fifth dimension was better than ever. In the Tao tomb, the Lord and the others gathered. The Lord glanced at Luo Ho and the others and said with a smile, Yi Xian has taken over the Tao court completely. He also asked the people of the Tao court to withdraw from the celestial abyss. Now, the celestial abyss is in our hands. Bitter King said solemnly, This is a good thing. The Lord smiled. It is indeed a good thing. At this moment, Qin Yaoyao suddenly said, Can Yi Xian really establish order? The Lord looked at Qin Yaoyao and smiled. What do you think? Qin Yaoyao said solemnly, I think so. The Lord asked, How so? Qin Yaoyao said softly, Because he is strong enough. And his backer is very strong. Backer? The surroundings suddenly fell silent when they heard this. Now, not only did Yi Xian have the support of the people behind him, but he also had the support of the doubting ancestors. Meanwhile, Qi Yaoyao continued, If he attains the Tao formation realm, then I think that very few in the Tao formation realm would be a match for him. Luo Ho frowned slightly. He just reached the Tao defense realm. Qian Yaoyao shook her head. In this world, some people can't be judged by common sense. Luo Ho was silent. Just as Yan Yaoyao had said, some people couldn't be judged by common sense. For example, Yi Xian's life was like cheating. Comparing oneself to others would really anger one to death. Qi Yaoyao continued, What we have to think about now is if Yi Xian really establishes order. At that time, should we obey his order? At the side, Bitter King frowned slightly. He's building his own. What does that have to do with us? Yao Yao smiled and didn't say anything. Luo Ho spoke solemnly, At that time, I'm afraid it won't be up to us. Meanwhile, the Lord suddenly smiled and said, Actually, establishing a completely new order isn't a bad thing. Of course, it might not be very difficult for him to establish a completely new order. However, he has to deal with two things first. Yan Yaoyao spoke solemnly, The Dark Abyss and the Whirling World. The Lord nodded. The Dark Abyss saved the Tao ancestors. Obviously, they've chosen to interfere. As for the Whirling World, I believe that they'll definitely not give up on this scripture. They would definitely not give up on this scripture. After all, Yixian already had 6 scrolls with him. If they could get Yixian's 6 scrolls, they would have 7 scrolls in total. So, if I'm not wrong, the whirling world has probably sent someone over. Luo Ho gazed at the Lord. What about us? What should we do now? The Lord smiled and said, nothing. We'll just wait and see. So long as we wait and see, then no matter if it's Yixian, the whirling world, or the dark abyss, none of them will come looking for trouble with us. At this point, he smiled faintly. Of course, we can provide some help to Yixian. Luo Ho looked at the Lord. The Lord is still optimistic about Yixian. The Lord smiled. Why not? Do you think it's just luck that a person with the calamity seed could survive until now? Luo Ho was silent. The Lord smiled. Don't forget one person. Munyanyan. Munyanyan. The expressions of everyone here changed when they heard this. They almost forgot about this woman. This woman had been reborn. Although she had lost her memories and strength, what if she regained her memories? After all, the 5th dimension no longer needed her to suppress it. Once she regained her memories, she would have all her strength. In that state, how many people in the world could be a match for Munyanyan? Luo Ho said softly, so, the dark abyss and the whirling world won't give Yixian too much time. The Lord suddenly stood up. This is not something we should worry about. I want to take a stroll in the 5th dimension. Are you interested? Luo Ho hesitated. Then let's go. The Lord smiled. Let's go. At this point, he left with everyone else. In a certain part of the starry sky, the originally calm starry sky suddenly trembled. It didn't take long for the space there to split open, and then an old man and a woman in a green dress walked out from within. Both of their faces were slightly pale. The old man looked around and said softly, it really wasn't easy to come to this place. The woman in green slowly closed her eyes. Her aura was very unstable because traveling through the starry sky had consumed too much of her mind and strength. After a while, the woman in green returned to normal. The old man smiled. How do you feel? The woman in green's expression was cold. Good. The old man nodded, looked into the distance, and said softly, I haven't been to this universe for many years. The woman in green said, Elder, can you feel the aura of Yixian? The old man slowly closed his eyes. After a while, he looked to the right. He is in the 5th dimension. The woman in green said, Then let's go. The old man shook his head. The woman in green looked at the old man, and the old man said in a deep voice, Girl, don't look down on this person. Although we haven't had any dealings with him, he is definitely not an ordinary person since he has 5 Tao scriptures. The woman in green was expressionless. I am not looking down on him, but I feel that he is not qualified for me to pay attention to him. The old man shook his head. Girl, there is always someone better than you. Be careful in everything you do. The woman in green did not speak. The old man sighed, feeling helpless. The woman in front of him was one of the 3 great evildoers of the Saha world. She indeed had the qualifications to be arrogant. However, this Yixian was able to collect 5 Tao scriptures, so he was definitely not an ordinary person. The reason he could live until now, besides his own strength, was also because of his cautiousness. Be careful in everything. At this time, the woman in green suddenly said, Elder, let's go meet that Yixian. The elder nodded. Let's go meet him. He was also a little curious about this Yixian. He was actually able to collect 2 Tao scriptures. Soon, the 2 disappeared into the starry sky. In the 5th dimension, the door to Yixian's room was tightly shut. During this period of time, he had been cultivating in seclusion, and no one came to disturb him. It was worth mentioning that more and more people in the 5th dimension had broken through to the Tao validation realm. Because this time, he had the help of the doubting. As one of the top forces, the doubting could not be compared to the current 5th dimension in terms of nurturing people. This was because the doubting had inheritance. In the 5th dimension, there was nothing. If it was not for Yixian's wealth, even Xianxia and the others could not reach the Tao validation realm, let alone others. And the most evildoer, Shao Qi, had already begun to break through to the Tao defense realm, As for Xiaoqi's talent, even experts like the doubting were very shocked. It was too terrifying. It could be said that Xiaoqi's talent was not inferior to Yi Xian's at all. In a hall somewhere, Venerable Mi, who was resting with his eyes closed, suddenly opened his eyes. The next moment he disappeared on the spot, and when he reappeared he was already in the starry sky. In front of him stood an old man and a woman in green. Seeing Venerable Mi, the old man smiled. "You are?" Venerable Mi asked. "The two of you are?" The old man smiled. "The two of us are from the whirling world. This time we came to meet young Master Yi." The whirling world. Venerable Mi's heart sank. He knew that this force would appear sooner or later, but he did not expect it to appear so soon. The old man smiled. "Is that okay?" Venerable Mi glanced at the two of them and then said, "I'll go ask the Tao Master." With that he turned and left. At this moment, the old man suddenly said, "Tao Master?" Venerable Mi glanced at the old man. "He is now the Tao Master of my doubting." With that, he turned and disappeared in the starry sky. The Tao Master. The old man frowned slightly. Yi Xian has actually become the master of the doubting. Didn't the information we gathered say that Yi Xian and the doubting are mortal enemies? The woman in green looked down and remained silent. No one knew what she was thinking. Meanwhile, Venerable Mi appeared once more in the starry sky, and he glanced at the two of them. "The Tao Master invites you in." As soon as he finished speaking, he gestured for them to enter. The old man nodded slightly. "Please lead the way." Venerable Mi nodded, and then he turned around and left. The two of them followed Venerable Mi. Under Venerable Mi's lead, the two of them arrived at Sword Hall, and only Yi Xian was there. Looking at the two old men, Yi Xian said with a smile, "Please take a seat." The old man smiled. "Young Master Yi, I've heard a lot about you." Yi Xian grinned. "You must be joking." The old man continued, "Old man, let's get straight to the point. I heard that young Master Yi has 5 Daoist scriptures." Yi Xian nodded. "Yes." The old man smiled. "Young Master Yi, those Daoist scriptures belong to my whirling sect. I wonder if young Master Yi can return them?" "They belong to the whirling sect." Yi Xian blinked. "Are you sure?" The old man said seriously, "They do indeed belong to my whirling sect. Young Master Yi, please return them." Yi Xian sighed softly. "You're too late." The old man frowned. "What do you mean?" Yi Xian said seriously, "The 5 Daoist scriptures have been taken by the dark world." Venerable Mi. Chapter 14:14. The dark world has taken it. In the hall, the old man frowned at Yi Xian's words. "Really?" Yi Xian nodded. "Really. If you check, you'll find out that the former Tao ancestor has joined forces with the dark world. They have many Tao scriptures now. If you want them, you can go to the dark world." The old man fell silent. The woman spoke abruptly. "I heard you're the #1 genius in this universe?" Yi Xian looked at her and smiled. "You must be joking." The woman looked at Yi Xian. "Shall we spar?" Yi Xian hurriedly shook his head. "No, no." The woman frowned. "Why?" Yi Xian laughed bitterly. "How can a place like this compare to the whirling world? The #1 genius here is probably a joke in the eyes of the whirling world." He paused for a moment and continued, "Moreover, your aura is thick. I'm afraid you've attained the Tao realm, right?" The woman glanced at Yi Xian and nodded slightly. Yi Xian's expression instantly turned solemn, and he cupped his fists. It's truly rare to see someone who has attained the Tao realm at such a young age. The woman's expression was calm. Even though there aren't many young Tao realm cultivators in the whirling world, there are quite a few. Yi Xian hesitated for a moment and said, "May I know when you attain the Tao?" The woman looked at Yi Xian. "I attained the Tao imperial realm at the age of 16, attained the Tao at the age of 18, and I'm 20 now." Yi Xian was stunned, and then he said with astonishment, "Attained the Tao at the age of 18? The woman nodded. "Yes. Why do you look so shocked?" Yi Xian laughed bitterly. "Miss, I didn't even attain the Tao at the age of 18. There's always someone better out there." The woman glanced at Yi Xian. "Don't be discouraged, you're not bad yourself." Yi Xian shook his head repeatedly. In this universe, I might be considered good, but if I were to be placed in your world, I'm afraid I'm nothing. The green-robed woman's lips moved, but she didn't know what to say. She was really not good at comforting people. At the side, the old man glanced at Yixian. No one knew what he was thinking. Venerable Me also glanced at Yixian with an odd expression. At this time, Yixian looked at the green-robed woman. May I know your name? The woman hesitated for a moment before she said, Xian Chu. Yixian cupped his fists and said, Miss Xian Chu, if you don't mind, I would like to ask you some questions about the martial Dao. Xian Chu looked at the old man. The old man smiled and said, Young Master Yi, since the Dao scripture is not in your hands, then we will have to leave. If there's a chance in the future, the two of you can discuss it. Yixian sighed softly with a downcast expression. Xian Chu glanced at Yixian and was about to speak when the old man suddenly said, Young Master Yi, we will be leaving now. With that he turned around and left with Xian Chu. At this moment Yixian hurriedly said, Miss, please wait. Xian Chu looked at Yixian. Yixian walked quickly to Xian Chu, and he hesitated for a moment before he said, Miss Xian Chu, will you be coming back? Xian Chu, Venerable Me. At the side, the old man glanced at Yixian with a slightly unsightly expression. Damn it, this kid has ulterior motives. Xian Chu was about to speak when the old man suddenly said, Young Master Yi, we won't be coming back. His tone was very flat and carried a trace of coldness. Yixian was stunned, and then he looked at Xian Chu. He was about to speak when the old man suddenly said, Young Master Yi, we have matters to attend to. Farewell. With that he left with Xian Chu. Yixian still wanted to say something, but the old man disappeared with Xian Chu. Yixian was stunned, and a moment later, he turned to look at Venerable Me. Am I very scary? Venerable Me hesitated. A little. At this moment he was quite emotional. No wonder Bai Dizzy couldn't defeat this fellow. This fellow was really shameless. In fact, he was quite impressed with Yixian because Yixian had resolved this crisis with just a few words. At least it was temporarily resolved. At this moment, Yixian suddenly left the hall. Outside the hall, Nian Nian appeared beside Yixian. Nian Nian turned to look at Yixian and giggled. Where are we going to play today? Yixian laughed. You decide. Nian Nian blinked. Roast fish first. Hearing that, Yixian instantly burst into laughter. Roast fish. In next to no time, Yixian took Nian Nian's hand and vanished into the distance. Xian Chu and the old man looked down from the starry sky, and no one knew what they were thinking. The old man suddenly said, Xian Chu, do you believe that scripture is in the hands of the dark world? Xian Chu spoke softly, It should be true. The old man was quite puzzled. But Xian Chu looked down and said, He doesn't seem like someone who would lie. The old man was speechless. Xian Chu continued, Should we go to the dark world? The old man shook his head. The dark world isn't like the fifth dimension. It isn't that simple. Xian Chu gazed at the old man. The old man thought for a moment and said, Wait for me to investigate and understand the ins and outs of the matter. Xian Chu nodded. All right. The old man glanced at Xian Chu, hesitated for a moment, and said, Little girl, what do you think of Yixian? Xian Chu gazed at the old man. Elder, why do you ask? The old man replied, I'm just asking. Xian Chu fell silent for a moment before he said, He's a good person. The old man's face fell. Little girl, in my opinion, Yixian might not be a good person. Moreover, he's quite flashy, so you have to be careful. Xian Chu's expression was calm. Elder, what are you trying to say? The old man hesitated for a moment before he said, Little girl, you're the most monstrous genius of my whirling sect, and you're the next sect master. Of course, this doesn't mean that you have to be heartless. However, the person you choose must be a genius favored by the heavens. But this Yixian. As he spoke, he shook his head. Even though this Yixian isn't particularly bad, he isn't worthy of you. Xian Chu gazed at the old man. Elder, aren't you overthinking things? The old man sighed in a low voice. I'm not overthinking things. It's just that this Yixian is clearly a playboy. No matter what, Xianchu should avoid interacting with him. Xianchu gazed down with a calm expression. Elder, someone who was able to become a Dao Lord and manage the fifth dimension so well can't be too bad. As she spoke, she gazed at the old man. Elder, don't judge a person from a one-sided perspective. The old man laughed bitterly. Little girl, I'm not looking down on him. It's just that he's flashy, and he's intentionally trying to curry favor with you. I think. Xianchu shook her head. Elder, in your opinion he's trying to curry favor with me. But in my opinion, he's a humble and low-profile person. The old man was speechless. Xianchu continued. Elder, don't forget that he's a swordsman. A swordsman. The old man fell silent. Needless to say, this swordsman wasn't quite like the swordsman he'd imagined. Right at this moment, a figure suddenly appeared in front of the old man and Xianchu. It was Dark World's Lian Zun. Lian Zun cupped his fists and smiled. You two should be from the whirling world, right? The old man looked at Lian Zun. Dark World? Lian Zun smiled. The old man was expressionless. What's the matter? Lian Zun nodded. Your Excellency, why don't we cooperate? The old man frowned. Cooperate? Lian Zun smiled. The Yi Xian isn't simple. Not only does he have a mysterious expert behind him, but he also has a relationship with the ancient god Abyss. Most importantly, the old man suddenly interrupted Lian Zun. Isn't the Dao scripture in your Dark World's hands? Lian Zun was stunned. Who said that? The old man said. Yi Xian. Yi Xian. Lian Zun, the old man continued. Why isn't it in your doubting hands? Lian Zun said in a deep voice. To tell you the truth, my Dark World has 2 Dao scriptures, and that Yi Xian has 6. The old man frowned. He said you took them all. Lian Zun shook his head. He's bullsh * ting. The old man's face darkened. Yi Xian was lying? Xianchu suddenly said. You're saying he has 6 Dao scriptures? Lian Zun nodded. Xianchu looked at Lian Zun. Why didn't you take them? The old man looked at Xianchu. Girl, this isn't the point. The point is that Yi Xian is lying to us. Xianchu looked at the old man. Why isn't Dark World lying to us? Old man, Lian Zun suddenly smiled. Looks like you don't know much about this Yi Xian. He's a famous liar. If you get to know him better, you'll know who's real and who's fake. Xianchu looked at Lian Zun. If he has 6 Dao scriptures, why didn't Dark World take them? Lian Zun smiled. I told you. This Yi Xian isn't simple. Xianchu asked again. You want to join forces with us to fight for the Dao scriptures? Lian Zun nodded. Xianchu asked. What happens after we get the Dao scriptures? Lian Zun smiled. Why don't we talk about this after we get the Dao scriptures? Xianchu didn't speak anymore. He looked at the old man. The old man said after a moment of silence, Sir, I don't know who is telling the truth between you and Yi Xian. We'll look into it. As for the cooperation, let's not talk about it for now. With that he left with Xianchu. In the starry sky, Lian Zun was silent for a moment. He said softly, Yi Xian, can you be more shameless? When did Dark World snatch your Dao scriptures? Ancient God Abyss. At the top of a pyramid, Suja suddenly said, Dark World might be up to something big recently. Besides Suja, Suku asked in a low voice, What do you mean? Suja turned around and said, Many powerful auras are coming out from Dark Abyss. Hearing this, Suku's face darkened. Should we stop them? Suja shook his head. Suku was puzzled. Don't stop them? Suja slowly closed his eyes. Don't stop them. Let them continue, the more they do, the better. Suku was speechless. P.S. Many readers have been saying that I'm a liar. I just want to say that you've underestimated me. What's a mere monthly ticket? I don't want it. Chapter 14:15. Suk said solemnly, You want to use the plain-dressed woman to destroy the Dark Abyss? Hearing this, Suja opened his eyes. After a long moment of silence, he said softly, We've been at a stalemate with the Dark Abyss for hundreds of thousands of years. How many people have we lost in these hundreds of thousands of years? Su Ku was silent. Su Zhi continued, for the past hundreds of thousands of years, neither of us has been able to defeat the other. But now, it's time to end this long war. Suk asked solemnly, can that senior really destroy the dark abyss? Su Zhi looked up into the starry sky. Forget about destroying the dark abyss. Even if the ancient god abyss and the dark abyss were to join forces, we would still be no match for her. Su Ku's expression was grave. Is he really that strong? Su Zhi's eyes were clouded with confusion. You've never faced her before, you don't know how we feel when we face her. This is despair, true despair. The strength of the plainly dressed woman caused him to feel despair. At this time, Su Zhi suddenly laughed. I never imagined that an Yuan would want to kill Yi Xian. It seems like the heavens want an Yuan dead. Saying that, he looked at Su Ku. You can contact that young Master Yi and give him some help. Su Ku nodded. Understood. As if he'd thought of something, Su Ku said, according to my knowledge, Lian Zun is investigating that woman in a plain dress. Su Zhi laughed. Let him investigate. They won't be able to find anything anyway. Currently, only the people from the ancient god Abyss knew how strong the lady in the plain dress was. However, would the ancient god Abyss tell an Yuan about it? Of course not. Suk continued, and the whirling world. Hearing this, Su Zhi fell silent. Even the ancient god Abyss had to take the whirling world seriously. After a while, Su Zhi said, if young Master Yi is in danger, protect him at all costs. Su Ku looked at Su Zhi, at all costs. Su Zhi nodded. At all costs. Su Ku was silent. Su Zhi said, this friend of young Master Yi, my ancient god Abyss is definitely going to befriend him. Su Ku. Somewhere in the starry sky, Lian Zun sat cross-legged in the starry sky. His entire being seemed to be one with the starry sky. Next to him was a former Dao father. At that moment, the Dao ancestor had already recovered his body. At this time, Lian Zun opened his eyes. He looked down at the fifth dimension and smiled. Dao ancestor, how do you feel now? The Dao ancestor was expressionless and did not say anything. Now that the doubting had settled in the fifth dimension, how could he feel? With the support of the doubting ancestor, no one in the doubting world would recognize him as the Dao ancestor anymore. Lian Zun suddenly said, Dao ancestor, doubting, you've investigated Yi Xian before this. Do you know who that woman in a plain dress behind him is? The Dao ancestor shook his head. I don't know. Lian Zun frowned. You don't know? The Dao ancestor nodded. This person is too mysterious. I only know that she usually only uses one sword to kill. One strike. Lian Zun chuckled. Interesting. The Dao ancestor shook his head. This woman's strength is most likely above Dao attainment. Lian Zun said softly, above Dao attainment. Can you be sure? The Dao ancestor shook his head. I'm not sure because I've never come into contact with this person before. After a moment of silence, Lian Zun said, how do we find this person? The Dao ancestor looked at Lian Zun. You want to find her? Lian Zun stood up and looked down. This person is Yi Xian's Dao protector. Naturally, I have to figure out her background and true strength. Otherwise, she will be like a thorn in my throat. Saying this, he looked at the Dao ancestor. How about it? Are you interested in meeting this person? The Dao ancestor frowned. Lian Zun smiled. The Dao ancestor was silent. Lian Zun smiled. With your strength, even if you can't defeat the opponent, it shouldn't be a problem for you to escape unscathed. Of course, if you're afraid, it doesn't matter. I'll send someone else. The Dao ancestor said calmly, there's no need for someone else. I'll go myself. I also want to see how strong this person is. However, I don't know where this person is. Lian Zun said, didn't someone find her before you doubting? The Dao ancestor said in a deep voice, that's because of their talent. Now both of them are dead. Lian Zun thought about it and said, that's simple. As soon as he finished speaking, an old man suddenly appeared behind him. The old man's attire was a little gaudy. His body was covered in copper coins. In his left hand he held a long wooden staff and in his right hand he held a tortoise shell. Lien Zun smiled and said, "Master, thank you." The old man nodded slightly and slowly closed his eyes. Soon, the copper coins on his body began to tremble violently. Seeing that, the Dao ancestor frowned. "Is this a divination technique?" Lien Zun smiled and said, "Yes. However, it's not an ordinary divination technique. It's a divination technique from the Dark Sutra." Just as the Dao ancestor was about to speak, the old man suddenly opened his eyes. He looked into the depths of the starry sky and frowned. Lien Zun asked, "What's wrong?" The former master said hoarsely, "It's in a very, very far place." The Dao ancestor frowned slightly. "How far?" The former master said in a low voice, "Extremely far." The Dao ancestor looked at Lien Zun. Lien Zun said softly, "Very far. Isn't he Xian's Dao protector? Why is he so far away? Or does the other party have a motive?" The Dao ancestor said in a low voice, "He might have a motive." As he spoke, he looked at the former master. "Can you catch up to this person?" After a moment of silence, the former master said, "I can try." As he spoke, he opened his palm and a black copper coin appeared in his palm. He handed the copper coin to the Dao ancestor. "This item will guide you." The Dao ancestor nodded and took the copper coin. At that moment, Lien Zun suddenly said, "Dao ancestor, the main purpose of finding this woman this time is to test her. If you can't defeat her, don't become enemies with her. Protecting yourself is the most important." The Dao ancestor put away the copper coin and said calmly, "Don't worry. As long as I see this person, I'll know his strength." As he spoke, he paused for a moment and continued, "Even if I'm not her match, if I want to escape, she can't do anything to me. I still have that much confidence." Lien Zun nodded. "No matter what, it's better to be careful." The Dao ancestor nodded and did not say anything else. He turned around and left. Soon, he disappeared into the vast starry sky. After the Dao ancestor left, Lien Zun suddenly looked at the former master. "Is this trip ominous or auspicious?" The former master was silent. Lien Zun frowned slightly. "I don't know or can't say." The former master shook his head. "I don't know." As he spoke, he sighed softly. "I'm afraid this woman isn't that simple." Lien Zun asked, "What do you mean?" The former master shook his head slightly. "When I was calculating this person, I always had a feeling of unease in my heart. I've never seen such a scene before." As he spoke, he raised his head and looked into the depths of the starry sky. There was a trace of worry in his eyes. "I'm afraid he'll be in trouble this time." He was in trouble. Lien Zun raised his head and looked into the depths of the starry sky. He smiled and said, "I'm a little curious about how strong she is." As he spoke, he seemed to have thought of something and shook his head with a smile. "Killing with only one sword? It sounds very powerful." With that, he turned around and left. In the five-dimensional universe. In the Dao city, Yixian was strolling leisurely on the streets with Nian Nian. In her left hand, she was holding a roasted fish and in her right hand, she was holding a stick of candied hawthorn. Along the way, Nian Nian kept looking around curiously. Yixian looked at Nian Nian beside him and smiled. Actually, he didn't miss Nian to recover her memories so quickly because Nian Nian didn't have so many burdens now. She was very happy. Of course, it would be a good thing if she could recover her memory. At this moment, Nian Nian suddenly pulled Yixian's hand and pointed to the noodle shop not far away. Yixian laughed. "Let's go. Let's eat some noodles." Nian Nian quickly nodded. After the two of them found a place to sit down, Yixian looked at the boss in the distance and said with a smile, "2 bowls of noodles." In the distance, the boss smiled and said, "All right." Soon, the waiter placed 2 bowls of noodles in front of the two of them. Yixian looked at the 2 bowls of noodles in front of him in silence. At this moment, he thought of Yi Ling. Where was she now? At this moment, Nian Nian suddenly said, "What's wrong?" Yixian retracted his thoughts and said with a smile, "Nothing. Let's eat some noodles." Nian Nian was about to speak when a woman suddenly walked to the side of the two of them. It was Xianchu. Xianchu directly sat next to Yixin. Yixin was stunned for a moment and then said with a smile, "Miss Xianchu, we meet again." Xianchu looked at Yixin. "The Tao scripture is in your hands, right?" Yixin said with a smile, "It seems that Miss Xianchu has already come into contact with the dark world." Xianchu was expressionless. "Why did you lie?" Yixin was silent. Xianchu looked at Yixin and asked again, "Why did you lie to me?" Yixin smiled bitterly. "Miss Xianchu, if you were me, what would you do?" Xianchu's expression was cold and she did not speak. Yixin said again, "You are so strong. If I did not use this method, would you and your elder let me go?" "Definitely not." Xianchu said, "That Tao scripture belongs to the whirling sect." Yixin's lips curled up. "Are you sure?" Xianchu frowned. "What do you mean?" Yixin said with a smile, "As far as I know, this Tao scripture came from the whirling world. However, it does not belong to the whirling sect, right?" Xianchu shook her head. "You should know that it will only bring you endless trouble if you have it." Yixin suddenly said, "Did you cooperate with the dark world?" Xianchu shook her head. "However, the elder is very likely to cooperate with them." Yixin suddenly said, "Xianchu, why don't we cooperate?" Xianchu looked at Yixin. "We cooperate?" Yixin nodded. "We cooperate and deal with the dark world together." Xianchu looked at Yixin. "The elder will not cooperate with you." Yixin was confused. Xianchu said, "Because you are weaker than the dark world." Xianchu said again, "Moreover, you have more Tao scriptures than the dark world." Then she paused and said, "Can I have a look at those Tao scriptures?" Yixin said with a smile, "Of course you can." After saying that, he waved his right hand and 6 Tao scriptures appeared in front of Xianchu. Xianchu was stunned. She just let him see it? Xianchu looked at Yixin. "Why do you trust me so much?" Yixin said with a smile, "I treat you as a friend. Moreover, as the super monster of the whirling world, you will not do such a despicable thing, right? Of course, if you snatch it, then I, Yixin, am blind. I will admit defeat." Xianchu was silent. Chapter 14:16. Xianchu looked at Yixin. "Are you trying to play tricks with me?" Yixin smiled. "Miss Xianchu, are the Tao scriptures in front of you fake?" Xianchu looked at the 6 Tao scriptures. After a while, she said softly, "They are real." Yixin asked, "Then can you show me the Tao scriptures from the whirling world? Even if you're playing tricks." After a moment of silence, Xianchu lowered her head and said softly, "I'm sorry, I can't show them to you." Yixin smiled. "It doesn't matter. You can look at mine first." Xianchu hesitated and shook her head. She placed the 6 Tao scriptures back in front of Yixin. "I'm not looking at them." With that, she stood up and left. At this moment, Yixin suddenly said, "Why aren't you looking at them?" Xianchu stopped and looked at Yixin. "The whirling world's Tao scriptures are the sect's most precious treasures. Without the sect leader's permission, I can't show them to others." Yixin smiled. "Because you can't show them to me, you won't look at mine?" Xianchu nodded. Yixin thought for a moment and said, "Aren't you curious about these Tao scriptures?" Xianchu's expression was calm. "I'm curious, but I don't want to owe you anything." Yixin smiled. "How about this? I'll show you these Tao scriptures, and then I'll ask you some questions." Xianchu fell silent. Yixin smiled. "Don't worry, it won't be anything difficult for you." Xianchu nodded. "Sure." With that, she sat opposite Yixin. As if noticing something, she suddenly looked at Nian Nian. Nian Nian was holding a bowl and drinking soup. When she saw Xianchu looking at her, she hurriedly put down the bowl and grinned. Xianchu hesitated for a moment and nodded slightly. She knew Nian Nian's identity because she had investigated Yixin and the 5-dimensional universe before coming here. Nian Nian giggled. "Sister, do you want to eat noodles too?" Xianchu shook her head. "No, you eat." Nian Nian nodded and continued eating her noodles. Yixin looked at Nian Nian and shook his head with a smile. He realized that Nian Nian was a foodie. Now, not only did she like to eat fish, but she also liked to eat tanghulu and all kinds of delicious food. Xianchu picked up the Tao scripture in front of Yixin and read it. After some time, she looked at Yixin. Do you know the secret of the Tao scripture? Yixin felt a chill in his heart. Could it be that she knew about Tao scriptures and martial arts? At this moment, Xianchu wanted to say something but hesitated. Yixin asked softly, "What are you trying to say?" Xianchu thought for a moment and said, "Fine, I'll take it as returning the favor." Every Tao scripture contained a Tao scripture martial art and Tao scripture mental cultivation method. These martial arts and mental cultivation methods are currently the highest level of martial arts and mental cultivation methods known to us. Mental cultivation method. Yixian's expression turned cold. He knew about Tao scriptures and martial arts, but he didn't know about this mental cultivation method. At this moment, Yi Jiming's voice suddenly sounded. "I don't know either." Yi Xian nodded and said in his heart, "Of course I believe you, Jiming. It seems that this Tao scripture is not as simple as we thought." Xianchu placed the Tao scripture in front of Yi Xian. "I've memorized the mental cultivation method and martial arts of these Tao scriptures." Then she paused and said, "Two of the martial arts are very suitable for you. One is the Taoist fist and the Taoist body." Yi Xian was silent. Xianchu looked at Yi Xian. "You're very calm." Speaking of this, she narrowed her eyes slightly. "You've learned it." Yi Xian nodded. "To tell you the truth, I've learned it." Xianchu was silent. Yi Xian smiled. "Xianchu, you said that every Tao scripture has a mental cultivation method. I only know about Tao scriptures and martial arts, but I don't know about the mental cultivation method. Can you tell me?" Xianchu was silent. Yi Xian was speechless. This guy, he was always silent. Xianchu suddenly said, "Sure." Then she pointed at Yi Xian. A ray of white light entered between Yi Xian's eyebrows. Soon, countless information flowed into Yi Xian's mind. The mental cultivation method of every Tao scripture. Gradually, Yi Xian's expression changed. After learning about these mental cultivation methods, Yi Xian realized that he was wrong. Very wrong. These Tao scriptures and martial arts were very powerful. However, without the help of mental cultivation methods, their power was only average. But with the help of mental cultivation methods, their power could truly destroy the world. Just like his Taoist fist, if it had the help of mental cultivation methods, its power could at least be several times stronger. At this moment, he realized how terrifying these Tao scriptures and mental cultivation methods were. The mental cultivation method was the key. And his Taoist body also had mental cultivation methods. If it was combined with mental cultivation methods, at this moment, Yi Xian was very excited. Xianchu suddenly said, "Are you willing to give up these 6 Tao scriptures?" Yi Xian smiled and said, "Why do you ask this?" Xianchu looked at Yi Xian and said, "If you are willing to give up these 6 Tao scriptures, I can bring you to the Whirling sect. With your talent, you will definitely be valued. The stage there is bigger, and the cultivation resources here cannot be compared. In addition, if you are willing to join the Whirling sect, you can look at the last Tao scripture." Yi Xian shook his head. Xianchu said, "You refuse?" Yi Xian nodded and said with a smile, "Miss Xianchu, I want to protect this 5th dimension." Xianchu looked at Yi Xian and said, "On the path of martial arts, there are too many obstacles. It is not a good thing." Yi Xian suddenly asked, "Xianchu, do you have any friends?" Xianchu was stunned and then shook her head. Yi Xian asked again, "What about your relatives?" Xianchu said, "Only master." Yi Xian smiled and said, "I feel that there are more important things in this world than the martial Tao and the sword Tao. That is friends and relatives." As he said this, he looked around and said with a smile, "This is the 5th dimension. This is my home." Xianchu looked at Yi Xian and said, "If you do not give up on these Tao scriptures, not only you, but the entire universe will be in danger. This is because my Whirling sect is not the only Whirling sect in the Whirling world. There are other powerful forces. If I'm not wrong, these forces should already know that you have so many Tao scriptures. Before long, more and more experts from the whirling world will come to this universe. Moreover, you still have the dark world as your enemy. Your situation will become worse and worse. Yixian shook his head and smiled. My situation has always been very bad. Xianchu was about to speak when Yixian suddenly looked at Nian Nian and said with a smile, "Are you done eating?" Nian Nian nodded and patted her stomach. She grinned and said, "I am so full." Yixian laughed and said, "Let's go, I will take you to play." As he said this, he stretched out his hand. Nian Nian quickly grabbed his hand. Yixian looked at Xianchu and said with a smile, "Miss Xianchu, let's talk another day." Xianchu nodded slightly. Yixian pulled Nian Nian away. After Yixian and Nian Nian left, an old man appeared in front of Xianchu. It was the old man from the whirling world. The old man said, "He is not willing to give up?" Xianchu nodded. The old man shook his head. Those Tao scriptures are a disaster for him. This youth does not know how to choose. Xianchu said softly, "We have underestimated him." The old man looked at Xianchu. "What do you mean?" Xianchu looked at the old man. "Elder, why does the dark world want to ally with us?" The old man frowned. "You are saying that the dark world is afraid of Yixian." Xianchu nodded. "The dark world wants to ally with us because they want to use us." The old man said in a deep voice, "Indeed." Xianchu suddenly said, "Let's wait and see." The old man said in a deep voice, "Wait?" Xianchu nodded. "We can only wait." All he had to do was wait quietly. We do not have any deep hatred with Yixian. If we are not anxious, the other forces from the whirling world and dark world will be even more anxious. They will make the first move. The old man nodded slightly. "All right." Speaking of this, he seemed to have thought of something and said, "Girl, Yixian is a person with deep schemes. He showed you the Tao scriptures just now. That is definitely a trap. You must not have any other thoughts." Xianchu looked at the old man. "What other thoughts?" The old man smiled. "You know what I mean." Xianchu said softly, "What I see is a person who values friendship and righteousness." With that, he stood up and left. In the same place, the old man's expression was extremely ugly. A moment later, he slammed his palm on the table. "Damn Yixian. Shameless." Boom. The table shattered. After returning to the sword hall, Yixian was about to study the Tao scripture when Venerable Mi appeared beside him. Yixian looked at Venerable Mi. "What's the matter?" Venerable Mi nodded. "Bai Dizzy is back." Yixian was struck dumb. Then he said, "You are back?" Venerable Mi nodded. "Not alone. He brought over 30 great Tao guardians. Among them, there are 16 Tao defense and 14 Tao vindication. Other than that, some who left the doubting have all returned." Yixian said softly, "This old man is quite capable." Venerable Mi added, "He has a suggestion." Yixian said, "Speak." Venerable Mi said, "Bai Dizzy said that our biggest enemies now are the Dark Abyss and the Whirling World. The Dark Abyss is scarier than the Whirling World because they are united. The Whirling World is different. There are many forces there, each with their own ideas. We can form an alliance with some of the forces there. In short, we have to delay until Miss Nian Nian recovers her memory and strength." Delay. Yixian was silent. He really needed time now. The more time, the better it was for him and the fifth dimension. Venerable Mi said, "He also said that the fifth dimension looks safe now, but it is not. Because if the Dark Abyss wants to attack, it will not give the fifth dimension any chance. For now, the doubting and the fifth dimension together might not be able to defeat the Dark Abyss." Saying this, he looked at Yixian. He said that although the Tao Master is strong, he is only one person. Moreover, he has not reached the Tao attainment state. Once the Dark Abyss or the Whirling World send experts above the Tao attainment state, the fifth dimension will be very passive. Therefore, we must delay until Miss Nian Nian recovers her memory and strength. Moreover, he also told you to prepare for the worst. The Dark Abyss will most likely attack soon because the Dark Abyss does not dare to let Miss Nian Nian recover her memory and strength. After a moment of silence, Yixian said softly, "I understand." At this time, Venerable Mi said, Also, he made a decision on his own. Yixian was a little puzzled. What is it? Venerable Me hesitated for a moment, then said, he has already sent people to spread the news in the 5th dimension and the myriad worlds, saying that you are the son of the 9th dimension, and that you came to the 5th dimension to gain experience, Yixian. Chapter 1417. Son of the 9th dimension. Yixian was speechless. What was this old man by dizzy trying to do? Venerable Me said, he's probably doing this to confuse our opponents. Yixian smiled, let him be. He looked at Venerable Me. The 5th dimension might not be peaceful during this period of time. You have to keep an eye on it. Venerable Me nodded, understood. With that, he quietly retreated. Within the room, Yixian sat cross-legged on the ground and started to study the Tao scripture. With this Tao scripture, his Tao sword and Tao body would have a qualitative breakthrough. Power. Without power, everything was nonsense. In the 5th dimension, Lian Zun looked down. Beside him was the ancestor. After a while, Lian Zun suddenly smiled. If we make a move now, what are our chances of winning? The ancestor shook his head. Unknown. Lian Zun frowned. Unknown. The ancestor nodded. I've calculated it, but the heavenly secrets here are illusory, especially that Yixian. His fate cannot be determined. Lian Zun said softly, so mysterious? The ancestor nodded. However, I suggest that we make a move as soon as possible. Because this person is too monstrous, the longer we delay, the greater the price we will have to pay. Lian Zun was silent. The ancestor asked, are you worried about that plain-dressed girl? Lian Zun looked up into the depths of the starry sky. I wonder about that plain-dressed girl. That person's bloodline is not simple either. I've never seen such a strange bloodline. Other than that, don't forget that woman from the sword sect. Hearing this, the ancestor's expression became solemn. Sidutingyun. It was this woman that caused An Yuan to suffer heavy losses. Lian Zun said, I've already investigated. The sword sect below and Situ Tingyun's sword sect are in the meridian opening realm. In other words, when we make a move, Situ Tingyun might also make a move. The ancestor said solemnly, but if we don't make a move now, once Moon Yanyan recovers his memories and strength, then, Moon Yanyan. Hearing this, Lian Zun's expression turned solemn. This woman had almost killed a Tao ancestor with less than 30% of her strength. Most importantly, she had suppressed the entire 5th dimension by herself. Conservatively speaking, this woman's strength was at least above the Tao realm. The previous master said solemnly, no matter what, the longer we drag it out, the more disadvantageous it will be for us. Lian Zun looked up towards the depths of the starry sky. That Tao father should be finding that woman soon. The previous teacher asked, what if that woman's strength exceeds our expectations? Lian Zun asked, is our dark abyss very weak? The previous teacher was silent. Lian Zun said with a smile, whether it's Tingyun, Moon Yanyan, or that woman in a plain dress, I only don't look down on them. I'm not afraid of them. If it wasn't for the ancient god abyss, we would have destroyed them as well. The previous teacher hesitated for a moment before saying, we still can't underestimate the enemy. Lian Zun slowly closed his eyes. I won't underestimate the enemy, but the Dark Abyss, have never been afraid of anyone. Arrogant? No, he was confident. And Yuan had the capital to do so. At this moment, Lian Zun suddenly asked, is there any movement from the ancient god Abyss? The first teacher shook his head. There's no movement. Lian Zun frowned. Could it be that they aren't tempted by the Tao scriptures? The previous master said solemnly, it shouldn't be that he isn't tempted. He is probably observing in the dark and waiting for an opportunity. After a moment of silence, Lian Zun said, no matter what, let us know. Keep an eye on them. The first master nodded, understood. Lian Zun looked down and chuckled, wait for the Tao ancestors' news, then we will make our move. The previous teacher quietly retreated. Lian Zun slowly closed his eyes and said softly, Tao ancestor should have found that woman by now. In the 5-dimensional universe. 10 days later, Yixian walked out of the room and slowly closed his eyes. He operated the Dao body cultivation method, and gradually, a mysterious aura appeared around his body. Daoist body supreme energy. Yixian glanced at the layer of stellar energy on his body. This layer of stellar energy was equivalent to a shield. If one wanted to hurt his body, they had to break through this layer of stellar energy first. And the strength of this layer of stellar energy was dependent on his Dao body. In other words, the stronger his Dao body was, the stronger this layer of stellar energy was. Most importantly, as long as his body was not broken, he could continue to use this stellar energy. Simply put, unless the opponent broke his stellar energy and body in an instant, he would be able to continuously use this Dao body supreme energy. As long as his stellar energy and body could not be broken in an instant, he was invincible. It had to be said that even Yixian felt that this Dao scripture martial art and mental cultivation method was too abnormal. Other than this Dao body, the power of his Dao sword had also been greatly enhanced, at least 5 times. It could be said that the difference between this Dao scripture martial art and the mental cultivation method was like heaven and earth. Only with the assistance of the Dao scripture martial art could it be considered a true Dao scripture martial art. At this moment, a woman suddenly appeared in front of Yixian. The person who came was an old acquaintance of his. In Yao Yao. Yixian smiled. Heavenly King, how have you been? In Yao Yao sized up Yixian. Your strength has increased again? Yixian smiled. You can say so. In Yao Yao glanced at Yixian. You are getting stronger by the day. Yixian laughed. Heavenly King, there must be something you need from me, right? In Yao Yao looked at Yixian. From what we know, the Dark Abyss might be making a move. The Dark Abyss? Yixian's smile gradually disappeared. Do you know how many people they have? In Yao Yao shook her head. Nothing. Yixian was silent. Qi Yao Yao continued. In any case, you have to be careful. The Dark Abyss is not like doubting. If they want to make a move, they will definitely be prepared for everything. In other words, once they make a move, they might not give you any chance. Yixian nodded. Thank you for the reminder. In Yao Yao asked, have you come into contact with the whirling world? Yixian nodded. Yes, I have. Qi Yao Yao said, but you still have to be careful of them. They haven't made a move yet, probably waiting for the Dark Abyss to make a move. Yixian nodded. I know. In Yao Yao hesitated, then asked, when will Miss Nian Nian regain her memory? Yixian smiled bitterly. I don't know. In Yao Yao looked at Yixian, not saying anything. Yixian said again, I really don't know. Nian Nian showed no signs of regaining her memory. In Yao Yao sighed softly. I thought things would come to an end after the doubting incident, but now the whirling sect and the Dark Abyss have appeared. With that, she glanced at Yixian. Take care. With that, she turned and left. Yixian was silent where he was. At this moment, Nian Nian appeared beside Yixian. She gently held Yixian's hand. Is it because of me? Yixian shook his head. It's not because of you, it's because of me. Nian Nian tilted her head and looked at Yixian. Why? Yixian said with a smile. Because I have some good stuff that they all want. Nian Nian frowned slightly. Why? Yixian thought for a moment, then said, maybe I look easy to bully. Nian Nian blurted out, I'll protect you. With that, she was stunned. Yixian was also stunned. She looked at Nian Nian. Nian Nian? You? Nian Nian was a little confused. Yixian hurriedly said, did you remember something? Nian Nian shook her head. No. I don't know what happened to me just now. Yixian gently rubbed Nian Nian's little head, smiled. It's fine, it's fine. Let's go, I'll take you to roast fish. Hearing this, Nian Nian's eyes lit up. Okay. Yixian laughed. He took Nian Nian's hand and walked into the distance. Behind the two of them was Venerated Me. At this moment, an old man appeared beside Venerated Me. It was Bai Dizzy. Bai Dizzy said softly, Are you worried? Venerated Me nodded, but I don't think Dao Master is worried at all. Bai Dizzy said, He's not worried, he should have a plan to deal with it. Venerated Me shook his head. Recently, there have been some mysterious auras appearing in the 5th dimension, Some of them are so powerful. I'm afraid they've already surpassed Dao attainment. Bai Dizzy was silent. Venerated me sighed. Those 6 scrolls of Dao scriptures are really a disaster. Bai Dizzy glanced at Venerated me. Do you think if we hand them over, and Yuan will let him and the 5th dimension go? Venerated me frowned. Why not? Isn't their goal the 6 scrolls of Dao scriptures? Bai Dizzy looked at Venerated me. If you were in Yuan, after snatching Yi Xian's 6 scrolls of Dao scriptures, would you still let him and Moon Yanyan live? Venerated me was silent. Definitely not. Because if these 2 were alive, they would pose too great of a threat. Thinking of this, Venerated me sighed. Bai Dizzy continued, whether it's in Yuan or Whirling Sect, they won't let Yi Xian and Moon Yanyan live, just like us. If we don't kill Yi Xian and Moon Yanyan once Yi Xian grows up, or Moon Yanyan recovers his memory and strength, at that time, who can withstand their revenge? Saying this, he looked at Yi Xian and Yan Yan in the distance, whispering, I've dealt with him so many times. This guy is very sinister, let's wait and see. Venerated me nodded, that's the only way. Bai Dizzy said, I'm going to find Jin Wu. Venerated me frowned, will he come back? Bai Dizzy whispered, I'll try my best to persuade him to come back. Saying this, he turned and disappeared into the horizon. Somewhere in the starry sky, Dao Ancestor flew through the sky, his speed reaching the extreme. Wherever he passed, the starry sky trembled. Looking for the plain-dressed woman. In fact, he had long wanted to see who this woman was. Because this woman was too mysterious. She only needed 1 sword to kill. This was the result of their investigation. Other than this, there was no other information. How strong was she? No one knew. But Dao Ancestor knew he would know soon. At this moment, Dao Ancestor suddenly looked into the distance, his eyes narrowed. I finally found you. Let me see if you can kill me with 1 sword. Saying this, his speed suddenly increased. P.S. Vote. Chapter 14:18. In the endless starry sky, the stars shone brightly, mysterious and tranquil. How big was the universe? No one knew. Even the plain-dressed woman did not know. She walked from the 3rd dimension to the 5th dimension, but there was still no end to the starry sky. The starry sky was the same as the path of martial arts. There was no end, and no one knew where it ended. The vast universe was endless. The plain-dressed woman walked slowly. She walked very slowly because she could not completely sense that person. To be precise, it was the source of the calamity. Fate. Everyone in the world was studying fate, including the owner of the Dao scripture, but had fate really been studied? Man conquers nature? Many people were strong enough to change their fate, but who could be sure that the fate you changed was not your true fate? In fact, she had tried to forcefully cut off the cause of the calamity on Yi Xian's body. With her strength, it was not difficult at all to cut off the cause of the calamity. Just 1 sword was enough. But she gave up in the end, because she realized that if she cut off the cause of the calamity, Yi Xian would die. There was only one explanation. This cause of the calamity had a lot to do with Yi Xian himself. Fate was like an invisible hand that controlled everything in the dark. Her goal was to find out who this giant hand belonged to, find it, and then kill it. At this moment, a voice came from behind the plain-dressed woman. I finally found you. The plain-dressed woman stopped in her tracks. A man suddenly appeared 100 feet in front of her. Dao Ancestor. The Dao Ancestor looked at the plain-dressed woman and smiled. It was not easy to find you. The plain-dressed woman looked at the Dao Ancestor and did not speak. The Dao Ancestor chuckled. I only came this time for one purpose, and that is to see how strong you are. How strong? The plain-dressed woman said softly. You want to know how strong I am? The Dao Ancestor looked at the plain-dressed woman. Yes. The plain-dressed woman shook her head. You will be disappointed. The Dao Ancestor frowned slightly. What do you mean? The plain-dressed woman walked towards the Dao Ancestor. I don't know myself, so how would you know? As the voice fell, The plain-dressed woman had already appeared tens of thousands of feet behind the Dao ancestor. In the same place, the Dao ancestor looked into the distance, his eyes empty. In between his eyebrows, there was a small sword hole. The plain-dressed woman drew her sword. She drew her sword. However, he did not know when she had struck. When did she do it? Of course, this was not the main point. Most importantly, his Dao father was dead. Moreover, the woman in the plain dress had only used one sword strike. Even at that moment, the Dao ancestor still did not know how strong the woman in the plain dress was, because she only used one sword. In the starry sky, the body of the Dao ancestor became more and more illusory. He knew that he was going to disappear completely. At that moment, the Dao ancestor suddenly smiled. "What are you laughing at?" He laughed at himself for being a frog in a well. Before coming here, he felt that even if he wasn't a match for the woman in a plain dress, it wouldn't be a problem for him to escape unscathed. However, only now did he realize how childish his thoughts were. All this while, whether it was doubting or in Yuan, they had both placed great importance on the plain-dressed lady. However, at this moment, he realized that they had underestimated her. Great contempt. When they faced the plain-dressed lady, they thought that she was at most at the attainment of Dao. That was because the attainment of Dao was already the highest realm they could come into contact with. However, at that moment, he suddenly understood that the woman in the plain dress might be so strong that it was beyond their understanding. It was very stupid to use their eyes and knowledge to measure the woman in the plain dress. Because no matter how much they valued her, they were actually underestimating her. She was already so strong that it was beyond their understanding. He only understood this at the moment of his death. Apart from that, he also understood why no one knew how terrifying the woman in the plain dress was. It was because those who had seen her might have already died. As if he thought of something, he said softly, "Yi Xian, you have such a strong backing, why don't you say it? Isn't this harming others?" As he said that, he opened his palm and a copper coin slowly floated up. Soon, a voice rang out in the starry sky. "The woman in the plain dress, isn't that strong?" This sentence disappeared in the starry sky along with the copper coin. The Dao ancestor also disappeared along with it. If he couldn't take revenge, then he would drag a few more people to be buried with him. He also wanted to drag Yi Xian to be buried with him, but his strength didn't allow him to. Since he couldn't drag Yi Xian to be buried with him, then he could drag others. In the distance, the woman in the plain dress continued to move forward. To her, what happened just now was just a small interlude. She didn't take it to heart at all. After an unknown amount of time, the woman in the plain dress suddenly stopped. Not far in front of her, there was a huge city wall. This city wall spanned tens of thousands of miles across the starry sky, almost separating the entire starry sky. On these city walls, there were statues holding long spears. Behind the city wall, it was hazy and nothing could be seen. The woman in the plain dress did not stop and continued to move forward. Soon, the woman in the plain dress arrived at the city gate. The city gate was open and there was no one guarding it. The woman in the plain dress continued to move forward. At this moment, a voice floated out from the city gate. "One more step and you will die." The woman in the plain dress glanced at the city gate. "You're begging for death." After saying that, she had already entered the city gate. A moment later, a bloody head rolled out of the city gate. Inside the city gate, an angry shout suddenly rang out. "Who are you?" There was no response, but another head rolled out of the city gate. Soon, a powerful aura suddenly shot into the sky from within the city gate. Following that, an ancient voice came from within the city gate. "Who are you? How dare you invade my Xian city?" Before the voice faded, another head rolled out from within the city gate. At this moment, a voice rang out from within the city gate. "Senior, my Xian city's words just now have offended you. Please forgive me." This time, no head rolled out from within the city gate. A moment later, an incomparably respectful voice rang out from within the city gate. "We respectfully send off Senior. Senior, take care." In the five-dimensional universe. In the starry sky, The previous master beside Lien Zun suddenly opened his eyes. In the next moment, a copper coin appeared in front of him. Lien Zun looked at the previous master. "There's news?" The previous master said softly, "The Dao ancestor is dead." Lien Zun frowned slightly. "Did he say anything?" The previous master said solemnly, "He said that the woman in the plain dress is not that strong." "Not that strong," Lien Zun said softly, "looks like he fought with the woman in the plain dress." The previous master was silent. Lien Zun continued, "Looks like this woman in the plain dress will at most achieve the Dao. If that's the case, then there's nothing to be afraid of." The previous master shook his head. "I still feel that this matter is not simple." Lien Zun looked at the previous master. "What do you mean?" The previous master said solemnly, "I can't say for sure, but I have a bad feeling." After a moment of silence, Lien Zun shook his head. "No matter what, it's time to make a move." As he said that, he looked down at the five-dimensional universe. "If we continue to wait, once that Moon Yen recovers his memories and strength, it will be troublesome." The previous master did not say anything. He raised his head and looked into the depths of the starry sky. He wanted to sense the woman in the plain dress, but he could not sense her at all. As if he had thought of something, he took out the tortoise shell to make a divination. However, he could not calculate anything. Lien Zun laughed. "Don't think too much. As long as she doesn't surpass that level, we can deal with her." As he said that, he turned around and opened his palm. A black seal suddenly flew out. In the next moment, the seal directly turned into a pitch-black door. The door stood in the starry sky, and inside the door was a black whirlpool. A moment later, the space inside the door suddenly trembled. Not long later, 1,000 experts with spears and black shields walked out. Underworld army. Among these 1,000 people, the lowest was at the Dao validation realm, and the equipment they were wearing were all top-notch equipment. Other than these 1,000 people, there were 6 black-robed elders beside Lien Zun. 6 Dao attainment realm experts. Including Lien Zun and the previous master, there were a total of 8 Dao attainment realm experts. Lien Zun suddenly laughed. "Let's go meet this young Master Yi." After saying that, he disappeared. Below, in the five-dimensional universe, Yi Xian, who was playing with Nian, suddenly raised his head. After a moment of silence, he looked down at Nian and said with a smile, "You play by yourself, I have something to do." Nian gazed at Yi Xian. "All right." Yi Xian grinned and was about to leave when Nian suddenly grabbed his hand. Yi Xian looked at Nian and smiled. "What's wrong?" Nian hesitated for a moment and said, "I'll wait for you." Yi Xian smiled. "All right." Nian gazed at Yi Xian. "Don't lie to me." Yi Xian roared with laughter. "I definitely won't lie to you." As he spoke, he rubbed Nian's little head lightly, and then he transformed into a ray of light that shot into the sky. In the sky above Dao City, a ray of light descended in front of Lien Zun, and then it dispersed to reveal Yi Xian's figure. Lien Zun smiled. "Yi Xian, we meet again." Yi Xian grinned. "What's your name?" Lien Zun smiled. "You can call me Lien Zun." Yi Xian thought for a moment and said, "There doesn't seem to be any deep enmity between me and Yuan." Lien Zun nodded. "Indeed. However, we've taken a liking to the Daoist scriptures in your possession. So, can you give us those scrolls of Dao scriptures?" Yi Xian smiled. "I, Yi Xian, have always been very generous to my loved ones. Why don't you become one of my loved ones? In that case, I'll give the Daoist scriptures to you." Lien Zun frowned slightly. "Become one of your loved ones?" Yi Xian nodded. "Yes. I'll take you as my son. In that way, aren't we family? Since we're family, then what harm is there in giving them to you?" Lien Zun's expression instantly turned cold. "Yi Xian, do you only know how to use words?" Yi Xian chuckled. "You want the Daoist scriptures yet aren't willing to be my son. Since you're not my son, then why should I give them to you?" Lien Zun gazed at Yi Xian. "Kill." Meanwhile, Yi Xian suddenly opened his palm, and a sword appeared there. He roared with laughter. "Lien Zun, why don't we have a fight first?" Lien Zun chuckled. I have the advantage in numbers. Why should I fight you in a one-on-one battle? As he spoke, he looked down and his gaze fell on Yen Yen, who was on the street below. Kill her. The true source of his fear was Moon Yen Yen. When he heard Lien Zun, an old man at the Dao attainment realm charged towards Moon Yen Yen. Suddenly, a ray of light appeared in front of the old man. The old man frowned slightly, and then he raised his fist and swung it. Bang! The ray of light didn't shatter, but the old man was pushed over 30 m back. Lien Zun frowned when he witnessed this scene. Yi Xian's strength had exceeded his expectations. Suddenly, Yi Xian appeared in front of Lien Zun, and then he swung his sword. Lien Zun's eyes narrowed slightly. Yi Xian intends to kill me first. But is that even possible? Suddenly, Lien Zun's expression changed drastically. Because an enormous Tai Chi diagram had suddenly appeared beneath Yi Xian's feet. Along with the appearance of the Tai Chi diagram, his cultivation had been forcefully suppressed from the peak of the Dao attainment realm to the Dao control realm. He'd been directly suppressed by an entire realm. Moreover, Lien Zun possessed 4 domains. 4 domains. Moreover, Yi Xian's attack was a Dao sword, a strengthened version of the Dao sword. In an instant, Yi Xian had practically utilized all his trump cards. At this moment, terror appeared in Lien Zun's eyes. He hadn't expected that Yi Xian would become so terrifying in an instant. He didn't give it any further thought. He'd lost the initiative, so he didn't even have a chance to dodge. He could only defend passively. Lien Zun suddenly raised his arms, and a powerful force swept out from within him. Bang! Everyone watched as Yi Xian's sword descended. Bang! Lien Zun's body was blasted into pieces. Lien Zun's soul was about to flee. Meanwhile, Yi Xian swung his sword with his left hand, and it struck Lien Zun's head. In an instant, Lien Zun's soul was absorbed. It was an instant kill. Yi Xian sheathed his sword, and then he glanced at the dumbstruck crowd. That's it? I didn't even get to attack, and he fell. Everyone was speechless. Chapter 1419. Silence. Deathly silence. No one expected Yi Xian to kill Lien Zun in seconds. Lien Zun was at the peak of the Dao attainment realm. Let alone the Dark Abyss experts, even Venerable Me and the rest on Yi Xian's side were shocked. Yi Xian killed a Dao attainment realm expert in seconds. This was too exaggerated. In fact, even Yi Xian himself was shocked. His goal just now was to heavily injure Lien Zun, but he didn't expect to kill him instead. Only now did he realize that he had underestimated his own strength all along. It should be said that he underestimated the power of the Dao seal and Dao scripture. The main reason he could kill Lien Zun in seconds was because of the Dao seal and Dao scripture. One must know that the Dao seal not only brought him infinitely close to the Dao attainment realm, it also suppressed Lien Zun to the Dao controlling realm. Lien Zun no longer had an advantage in terms of cultivation realm. Coupled with the suppression of his 4 domains and the element of surprise, Lien Zun was killed. Yi Xian collected his thoughts and looked at the Dark Abyss experts. You guys don't really think I'm weak, do you? The ancestor stared at Yi Xian. Retreat. Retreat. He now understood that the Dark Abyss had severely underestimated Yi Xian's strength. Yi Xian's cultivation realm did not match his battle power. Retreat. Yi Xian's lips curled up. Do you think this is your home? You can come and go as you please. With that, he drew his sword and charged out. Venerable Me and the rest also made their move. Although the 5th dimension had fewer Dao attainment realm experts than the Dark Abyss, at this moment, the 5th dimension's momentum was like a rainbow. In terms of momentum, the 5th dimension had crushed the Dark Abyss. Yi Xian had killed Lien Zun in seconds. Not to mention the others, even Venerable Me's confident sword. The ancestor did not choose to continue fighting, but retreated to the black door behind him. Just as the ancestor and the rest were about to retreat, 10 powerful auras suddenly appeared in front of the black door. The one leading them was Su Ku. In fact, when the Dark World came to the 5th dimension, he had been secretly preparing to act at any time. Su Zhe had given a strict order to not let anything happen to Yi Xian. However, he had not expected Yi Xian to kill Lian Zun in a second. In fact, at that moment, even he himself was stunned. Did this young master Yi take medicine? He actually became so ferocious. Amidst his shock, he saw that his teacher and the others were about to retreat. At this time, he no longer remained silent and decisively chose to attack. If the ancestor and the others could die here, it would be a great thing for the ancient god Abyss. Seeing Su Ku and the others appear, the ancestor's face changed. Ancient god Abyss, you... He did not expect the ancient god Abyss to hit him when he was down. Su Ku did not care about the previous teacher, and directly brought the 9 people behind him and rushed forward. Seeing the appearance of Su Ku and the others, Yi Xian was stunned. He knew Su Ku, but he didn't know the people behind him. This wasn't the main point. The main point was, why would these people come to help him? Could it be that her charm was too great? On the other side, Xian Chu and the old man beside her quietly watched as Yi Xian and the others surrounded and killed the experts from the Dark Abyss. Actually, both of them were extremely shocked at this moment. Yi Xian had just killed a Dao Attainment Realm expert in a second. It was an instant kill. Although he had used external items, it was still too terrifying. Xian Chu said softly, "We underestimated him." The old man was silent. This was a serious underestimation. Xian Chu looked at Su Ku and the others. These people should be from the ancient god Abyss. It seems that the ancient god Abyss has chosen to stand on Yi Xian's side. The old man said, "The ancient god Abyss and the dark Abyss are mortal enemies. It is not surprising that they would help Yi Xian." Xian Chu looked into the distance and did not speak. The old man sighed softly. This Yi Xian was too good at pretending to be a pig to eat a tiger. When the two of them went to see Yi Xian, this guy kept showing weakness. Too cunning. On the other side, the Lord and the others were also there. At this moment, the Lord and the others had extremely solemn expressions. They had to admit that Yi Xian's instant kill of a Dao Attainment Realm expert had shocked them. That was the peak of the Dao Attainment Realm. He had been instantly killed. At this moment, the Lord suddenly said, "That is the Dao Seal, a treasure of the doubting realm. It used to doubting our ancestors. Not only can it increase the owner's strength, but it can also suppress the opponent's realm." When he spoke up to here, he paused for a moment and said, "But even then, it's still a bit too exaggerated." Yan Yaoyao looked at Yi Xian in the distance. "It seems that we have not truly understood him." The Lord smiled and said, "He has indeed been giving us surprises." Luo Ho suddenly said, "Should we help him now?" The Lord shook his head. "There is no point in helping him now." Luo Ho was silent. He naturally understood what the Lord meant. If they wanted to help, they should help first. If they helped now, they would not be sincere. The Lord looked at Yi Xian in the distance and smiled. "He does not need our help." As he said this, he seemed to have noticed something and frowned. His sword. Everyone looked at Yi Xian in the distance. At this moment, the sword in Yi Xian's hand was constantly devouring the souls of the Dark Abyss experts. At this moment, including the previous Lian Zun, the soul-suppressing sword had already absorbed the souls of 4 Dao Attainment Realm experts. The rest of the Dao Attainment Realm experts were countless. The Lord's expression was a little solemn. This sword has probably broken through again. About an hour later, the battle ended. The late master brought a few Dao Attainment experts and escaped, but the rest were all killed. One should know that the ancient god Abyss, including the doubting, had a total of 13 Dao Attainment Realm experts. Not far away, Yi Xian put away his sword and walked in front of Su Ku. He smiled. "Senior, we meet again." Su Ku smiled. "A scholar has been separated for 3 days. My young friend is no longer the young friend from before." In fact, his heart was rather complicated. When he first met Yi Xian, he still had the ability to kill Yi Xian. But now, Yi Xian already had the ability to kill him. This speed of improvement was simply unimaginable. Yi Xian glanced at the people behind Su Ku and said, "Senior, you are from the ancient god Abyss?" Su Ku nodded. "Yes." Yi Xian looked at Su Ku. "Senior, why did you help me?" Su hesitated and said, "We are mortal enemies with the Dark Abyss. The enemies of the Dark Abyss are the friends of the ancient god Abyss." Yixian said, "Is that all?" Su smiled. "My young friend, don't worry. The ancient god Abyss has no ill intentions towards you." Yixian smiled. "Senior, you must be joking. No matter what, thank you for your help just now. I, Yixian, am eternally grateful." Su said in a low voice, "My young friend, the Dark Abyss has failed this time. They will definitely not give up. And this force is extremely powerful. You must be careful." He paused and said, "During this period of time, the 10 of us will stay in the 5th dimension to prevent the Dark Abyss from launching a sneak attack." Yixian hesitated for a moment and said, "You will stay in the 5th dimension to protect me?" Su asked, "Is there a problem?" Yixian looked at Su. "Why?" Su thought for a moment and said, "We want to be friends with you." Yixian's expression was slightly strange. "Is my charm really that great?" At this time, Su suddenly smiled bitterly. "My young friend, to tell you the truth, the reason we came to the 5th dimension is related to the senior behind you." "The senior behind me?" Yixian was struck dumb. Then he said, "Qing?" Su was surprised. "The senior in the plain dress?" Yixian nodded. "Yes." Su looked at Yixian. "I wonder what is the relationship between you two?" Yixian said, "I am her brother." Su's expression was a bit strange. This younger sister is much stronger than her brother. Although Yixian is also strong, he is still not strong enough compared to the plain-dressed girl. Yixian sighed with emotion. In fact, he really wanted to see Qing, but he didn't know where she was now. At this time, a sword cry suddenly came from the side. Yixian turned his head and saw that the sword cry was from the soul-suppressing sword. After absorbing so many souls, the soul-suppressing sword's aura was crazily rising. Seeing this scene, Yixian was happy. The soul-suppressing sword is about to break through. As if thinking of something, Yixian directly stored the soul-suppressing sword into the prison pagoda. It's better to break through in the pagoda. After that, Yixian put away the equipment of the experts from the Dark Abyss. All of them were the best of the best. Even though they couldn't compare to the treasures of the Jialong clan, they were still top grade. At this time, Su suddenly said, "Little friend, I will leave first. You must be careful during this period of time. That Dark Abyss is not a good person. You must not underestimate it." Yixian nodded. "Understood. Thank you for your help, senior." Su smiled. "You are too polite. From today onwards, my ancient god Abyss and the 5th dimension are allies." As he said that, he specially looked at Xianchu and Su. Yixian felt a little emotional. He naturally knew that the reason why the ancient god Abyss was so friendly to him was because of Qing. Needless to say, Qing must have been to the ancient god Abyss. He just didn't know if the ancient god Abyss was beaten. He knew that Qing's temper was not very good. Su didn't say anything else. He turned around and left. As for the 10 Dao realm experts he brought with him, they stayed in the 5th dimension. Yixian looked at Venerable Me, Senior Me, "Clean up the battlefield." Venerable Me nodded. "All right." Yixian turned around and left. Everyone looked at each other. They hadn't expected the matter to end just like that. On the other side, Xianchu said softly, "Looks like the ancient god Abyss didn't become friends with Yixian because they are mortal enemies with the Dark Abyss." The old man fell silent. At this moment, he realized that the matter was getting more and more troublesome. Xianchu suddenly looked down. "The Dark Abyss will definitely not give up. Let us wait and see." As she spoke, she paused for a moment and said, "Elder, send an order to my master. Ask her to come here." The old man was stunned, and then he said, "This? Why?" Xianchu looked at the old man. "The two of yous can't hold this place down." The old man. Below, Yixian arrived on the street. As soon as he landed, Nian threw herself into his arms. She hugged Yixian tightly as if she was afraid that Yixian would lose her. Yixian was about to speak when Nian suddenly looked up at Yixian. At some point, her face was covered in tears. Yi Xian felt an indescribable pain in his heart. He hurriedly said, "Don't cry. Who bullied you?" Nian Nian looked at Yi Xian as her tears flowed uncontrollably. "Am I very useless? I can't help you at all." Yi Xian was about to speak when the space beside him suddenly split open. A moment later, a figure floated out. Yi Xian's expression changed drastically when he saw this. He suddenly drew his sword and slashed. The sword slashed down. The sword slashed through the air. Yi Xian was alarmed. He activated his Dao seal and was about to attack again when the figure had already retreated 100 feet away. At the same time, Nian Nian was beside him. Above the Dao attainment realm, Yi Xian's expression instantly turned ferocious. The figure suddenly grabbed Nian Nian's shoulder with his right hand. "If you want to save her, bring the 6 Dao scriptures to the mortal world. Come alone. If you don't come within 2 hours, her soul will be destroyed." With that, he and Mu Nian Nian disappeared. At this moment, Nian Nian's weak voice came from afar. "Come." In the same place, Yi Xian held the sword in his right hand tightly. His entire body emitted an extremely terrifying killing intent and hostility. P.S. Now that Qing Luan is in my hands, if you want to save her, give me the ticket. If not, I'll kill her. Do as you see fit. Chapter 1420. Venerated Me and the others appeared the moment the figure and Nian Nian vanished. Venerated Me and the others' expressions darkened when they saw Nian Nian being taken away. They hadn't expected in Yuan to send an expert above the Dao realm. Meanwhile, Su Ku suddenly appeared with an old man by his side. It was Suzhi. Suzhi looked at Yi Xian and hesitated for a moment before he said, "My friend, I'm sorry. The old man is late." Actually, Su Ku had gone back to invite Suzhi over. He knew that in Yuan would never let the matter rest, and if in Yuan wanted to make a move, he would definitely send an expert above the Dao realm. Because an expert at the Dao realm was no longer a threat to Yi Xian. Therefore, he had decided to invite Suzhi over. However, he hadn't expected in Yuan to act so quickly. Yi Xian took a deep breath and looked at Suzhi. "Senior, where is the Milky Way?" Suzhi hesitated for a moment before he said, "It's a very dangerous place. It's a forbidden place because anyone who steps into the mortal world will have their cultivation sealed and become immortal." Yi Xian looked at Suzhi. "How do I get there?" Suzhi said solemnly, "My friend, you'd better not go. Because your cultivation will be sealed and you will become immortal. However, in Yuan won't do that. Because the mortal world was created by the owner of the dark scripture. Anyone who cultivates the dark scripture will not be suppressed by the dark Dao laws there. The reason he wants you to go there is because he knows that he can't kill you in the outside world. However, if you go there..." Yi Xian closed his eyes slowly. "Senior, just tell me how to get there." Suzhi wanted to persuade him, but Yi Xian suddenly opened his eyes. His eyes were bloodshot. The power of his bloodline was surging. Suzhi was shocked. Yi Xian's bloodline was actually so powerful. After a while, Su Ku sighed softly and pointed with his finger. A ray of white light entered between Yi Xian's brows. Just as Yi Xian was about to disappear, a voice came from the side, "Remember to come back." The one who spoke was Zhang Wenxiu. Yi Xian disappeared into the horizon. Zhang Wenxiu looked at the sword ray in the horizon and a voice floated over, "I'll try my best." "Try my best." Zhang Wenxiu was stunned. Su Ku looked at Suzhi. Suzhi shook his head. "There's no other way." Suzhi said, "There's no other way." It was not because he, the dark scripture master, was because he was the disciple of the Dao scripture's disciple. One had to know that the owner of the dark scripture was the disciple of the Dao scripture's owner. He created the dark scripture based on the Dao scripture. How terrifying was his strength! The one had the yen had always had the abai. The yen had always, but they always had the dragon. Zhang had always. The Gu ancient had the wan. The ancient god abyss would enter the mortal world as soon as the dark abyss was in danger. At that time, the ancient god abyss would not be able to do anything. The ancient god Abyss wanted Yi Xian to go to the mortal world for a simple reason. It was to deal with the ancient god Abyss and the people behind Yi Xian. As long as Yi Xian entered the mortal world, the ancient god Abyss would not dare to make a move. As for the people behind Yi Xian, no matter how strong they were, would they dare to go to the mortal world? It was fair to say that for Yi Xian, this was a deadly trap. At this moment, an old man suddenly appeared in front of them. It was the master who had escaped earlier. It was not his real body, but a shadow. The master looked at Suzha. Suzha, the honored one, said that he did not expect you to protect Yi Xian personally. Suzha was expressionless. I did not expect the honored one of the three masters of the Dark Abyss to come personally. The master who had kidnapped Moon Yanyan was the honored one of the three masters of the Dark Abyss. The master laughed. We have won this battle. Suzha smiled. Is that so? The master smiled. We welcome the people behind Yi Xian to the mortal world. They must come, otherwise, we will be disappointed. After saying that, he disappeared. Suzha was silent for a moment, then he asked softly, will she go? The he was referring to was the woman in the plain dress. At this moment, a voice suddenly rang out, where is he? Suzha turned his head. There was a woman standing in front of him. Suzha looked at the woman in front of him, his eyes full of wariness. He did not know when this person had appeared in front of him. Who is this? Suzha asked in a low voice. Your Excellency, you are? The woman looked at Suzha. Where is he? Suzha hesitated. My friend Yi Xian? The woman nodded. Suzha said in a low voice. The people from the Dark Abyss sent him to the mortal world. The woman looked into the depths of the starry sky. How? Suzha hesitated for a moment, then said, Senior, the mortal world was created by the owner of the dark scripture. It has the law of darkness. It can suppress one's cultivation. The woman suddenly asked, how do we get there? Suzha looked at the woman. She blinked. Don't I look like an expert? Suzha was speechless. The woman said again, show me the way. Suzha hesitated for a moment, then bent his finger and a ray of white light entered the woman's forehead. After a while, the woman was about to leave, but at this moment, Zhang Wenxiu suddenly asked, you are? The woman looked at Zhang Wenxiu and asked, you are? Zhang Wenxiu looked at the woman. I am his woman. Woman. The woman blinked. His woman? Zhang Wenxiu looked straight at the woman. Yes. The woman looked at Zhang Wenxiu and smiled. I like your character. As she said that, she opened her palm. Let's go, I'll bring you to see your man. Zhang Wenxiu hesitated for a moment, then walked over to the woman and held her hand. The woman was about to leave with Zhang Wenxiu when she seemed to have noticed something. She suddenly turned her head and looked at Xiao Qi. When she saw Xiao Qi, the woman was slightly stunned, then she nodded slightly as a greeting. Xiao Qi looked at the woman, not saying a word. At this moment, Zhang Wenxiu suddenly asked, Senior, you are? The woman smiled. According to seniority, he should call me Aunt. As she said that, she looked into the distance. Let's not waste any more time. This clone has gone through too many galaxies and wasted too much energy. It can't stay for too long, let's go. As soon as she finished speaking, she vanished on the spot with Zhang Wenxiu. In the field, Suzha and the others felt like they had been struck by lightning. Clone. It was just a clone. Suzha felt his head spinning. At that moment, he had felt an incomparable sense of danger, but he had never thought that this woman was just a clone. Just a clone was enough to make him feel an incomparable sense of danger. What did this mean? If the real body was here, how terrifying would it be? Thinking of this, Suzha could not help but break out in cold sweat. At this moment, Su Ku suddenly said softly, his father, his brother, his sister, his senior sister, his aunt. This is too much. Suzha was speechless. Somewhere in the galaxy, the woman was holding Zhang Wenxiu's hand as they flew through the air. Zhang Wenxiu looked at the woman. Senior, the woman smiled. Call me Aunt. Zhang Wenxiu hesitated, then said, Aunt? He's not an ordinary person, right? The woman nodded. He's not an ordinary person. Zhang Wenxiu was silent. The woman said softly, His background is very complicated, I can't explain it clearly. Zhang Wenxiu was silent for a moment, then said, "Are you guys very far away?" The woman nodded, "Very far away. It's not easy to come here." Zhang Wenxiu was silent. The woman glanced at Zhang Wenxiu, smiled, "I should bring you to see someone." Zhang Wenxiu looked at the woman, "Who?" The woman smiled, "His mother." Zhang Wenxiu said in a low voice, "Dugu Xian." The woman shook her head, "His real mother." Zhang Wenxiu frowned, "Dugu Xian is not his real mother?" The woman hesitated, then said, "You can say that. Sigh, this matter is very complicated. It's all because of the disaster cause, I can't explain it clearly to you." Zhang Wenxiu suddenly asked, "How strong is the woman in the plain dress?" She had always been curious about the woman in the plain dress. The woman was silent. Zhang Wenxiu looked at the woman, then asked, "Aunt, can you beat her?" The woman blinked. "Can I not answer this question?" Zhang Wenxiu was speechless. Somewhere in the starry sky, Yixian flew on his sword. He raised his speed to the limit. Everywhere he passed, sword chi tore through the starry sky. It was incomparably terrifying. In Yixian's body, the blood was boiling. His whole body seemed to be on fire. Soon, Yixian arrived in front of a black hole. He turned into a sword light and entered the black hole. Boom! The entire black hole shook violently. Sword chi tore through the black hole. Soon, Yixian showed up in a starry sky. As soon as he showed up in this starry sky, he felt all of his cultivation had disappeared. But his bloodline power was still there. The great Tao law could suppress his cultivation, but it could not suppress his bloodline power. At this moment, a middle-aged man suddenly appeared not far from Yixian. Human Venerable. One of the three great venerables of the Dark Abyss. On the right side of the human venerable was Nian Nian. Yixian's gaze fell on Nian Nian. Nian Nian kept crying. "I'm sorry." Yixian shook his head. "You're not sorry." "I'm sorry. Don't be afraid, even if I die, I'll be with you, okay?" Nian Nian lowered her head slightly, her body trembling. She clenched her fists tightly, nails digging into her palms, blood flowing. Human Venerable looked at Yixian. "Just you?" Yixian nodded. "Yes." Human Venerable looked at Yixian. "Where's the Tao scripture?" Yixian said, "Let her go." Human Venerable shook his head. "You're not qualified to negotiate with me." Yixian looked at Human Venerable. "If you don't let her go, don't even think about getting the Tao scripture. You can kill her, because before I came, I was already prepared to die. But if you die like this, the 6 Tao scriptures will fall into the hands of ancient God Abyss." Human Venerable chuckled. "Threatening me? I won't kill her, I'll torture her until you hand over the Tao scripture. Let's see who's more patient." With that said, he suddenly placed his right hand on Nian Nian's head. A powerful force enveloped her. Following that, Nian Nian's entire face twisted. Because her bones were being crushed bit by bit, Nian Nian was in extreme pain. But she did not cry. She looked at Yixian, forcing a smile that was uglier than crying. "You don't hurt." Chapter 1421. It doesn't hurt? Venerable Human looked at Nian Nian and smiled. "How interesting. It seems that not only does he care about you, you also care about him." Saying that, he was about to exert force, but at this time, Yixian suddenly opened his palm. In his palm, there were 6 Tao scriptures. Venerable Human looked at Yixian, the corners of his mouth slightly raised, his smile bright. "Have you lost your patience?" Yixian's expression was calm. "Can you let her go?" Venerable Human released Mu Niannian. He slowly walked towards Yixian, smiling. "Yixian, do you know? When you appeared in this place, I suddenly realized that I overestimated you. You have guts, you have intelligence, and you have strength. Unfortunately, you are not ruthless enough. You may be ruthless enough to your enemies, but you are not ruthless enough to your own people. What you don't know is that your so-called loyalty is meaningless, because these are your weaknesses that your enemies can exploit." Yixian suddenly bent his finger. The 6 Tao scriptures appeared in front of Venerable Human. and he himself appeared in front of Nian Nian. Venerable human put away the 6 Tao scriptures. He glanced at Yi Xian, but did not stop Yi Xian. In this place, he was invincible. Yi Xian gently hugged Nian Nian, but with this hug, Nian Nian suddenly sucked in a breath of cold air. She looked at Yi Xian, tears streaming down her face, feeling wronged. It hurts. Yi Xian quickly let go. He gently grabbed Nian Nian's hand, looking at Nian Nian's broken bones. His heart felt like it was being twisted by a knife. I'm sorry. Nian Nian looked at Yi Xian, tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry, I still can't remember the past. I'm too useless. How ridiculous. At this time, the distant venerable human suddenly laughed. It's really ridiculous. 5th dimension Tendo, although I don't know your true strength, you were able to injure a Dao completion realm expert with less than 30% of your strength, so you must have some skill. What's laughable is that, for the sake of this Yi Xian and that so-called 5-dimensional universe, you didn't even use 70% of your strength until your death. For an expert like you to not sever the karma that binds you, I can only say that you're really stupid. Nian Nian looked at Yi Xian. Will we die? Yi Xian gently caressed Nian Nian's cheek and smiled. Are you afraid? Nian Nian shook her head. With you around, I'm not afraid. Yi Xian suddenly said, Can I kiss you? Nian Nian blinked. Kiss me? Yi Xian nodded. Nian Nian's face was slightly red, and her voice was as soft as a mosquito. Just once. Yi Xian said seriously, You agreed. You can't hit me in the future. Nian Nian slowly closed her eyes, feeling a little shy. Kiss me. I won't hit you in the future. Yi Xian leaned over and gently touched Nian Nian's forehead. They separated at the touch. Nian Nian opened her eyes and glanced at Yi Xian. Is it over? Yi Xian nodded. It's over. However, I'm a little regretful. Nian Nian blinked. Why? Yi Xian looked at Nian Nian and said seriously, If we can survive today, I think I'll definitely be beaten by you in the future. However, it doesn't matter. Who knows if there's a tomorrow? With that, he leaned over and gently touched Nian Nian's forehead. Even if I'm gone, you have to live well, understand? With that, he suddenly stored Nian Nian into the creation gourd. He grabbed the creation gourd and threw it toward the exit of the mortal world. He roared, Take her away. To the 4-dimensional universe's netherworld palace. Not far away, the human venerables suddenly laughed. Let her go? Are you kidding me? With that, he was about to make a move. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly appeared in front of him. In the next moment, an extremely powerful bloodline power swept out from his body. Boom! In an instant, a killing intent swept across the heaven and earth. This place had the laws of darkness which could suppress one's cultivation. However, it could not suppress Yi Xian's bloodline. Seeing that Yi Xian could actually use the power of his bloodline, the human venerable frowned. How is this possible? At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly slashed forward. It was not a Dao sword because he could not use a Dao sword at all. He also could not use a Dao seal. This place could even suppress a Dao seal. To put it simply, other than the power of his bloodline and his Dao body, he could not use any other power or external objects. The sword slashed down. The sword stopped half an inch away from the human venerable's head. The human venerable's 2 fingers caught Yi Xian's sword. The human venerable looked at Yi Xian. I underestimated your bloodline power. With that, he slightly tightened his fingers. Boom! In an instant, Yi Xian was blasted hundreds of feet away. After repelling Yi Xian with 1 finger, the human venerable suddenly turned his head and looked in the direction where the gourd of fortune escaped. At present, compared to Yi Xian, Mu Nian was a greater threat. The human venerable was about to make a move when a sword chi slashed at him from behind. The human venerable frowned. He suddenly turned around and took a step forward. At the same time, he punched out. Before Yi Xian's sword fell, the human venerable's fist had already landed on his chest. Bang! Yi Xian spat out a mouthful of blood and was instantly sent flying thousands of feet away. However, in the next moment, he once again rushed toward the human venerable with his sword. The blood-red sword light tore through the space. The blood-red light was overwhelming. In the distance, the human venerable slowly clenched his right hand. His eyes were filled with cold, killing intent. It's time to end this. With that said, he suddenly disappeared. In the field, the space suddenly cracked. In the next moment, a shadow directly hit Yi Xian. Boom! The sword light around Yi Xian was directly smashed. At the same time, Yi Xian was sent flying. As soon as he stopped, the human venerable suddenly appeared in front of him. The human venerable directly punched at Yi Xian's throat. Yi Xian blocked with his sword. Boom! Once again Yi Xian and his sword were sent flying. In the air, the human venerable punched again. As the punch was thrown, the space cracked inch by inch. In the distance, a fist suddenly landed on Yi Xian's chest. Yi Xian suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood and was thrown backward. The human venerable looked at Yi Xian and sneered. The legendary Daoist body. If it was outside, it might be a little tricky. Unfortunately, it's here. Today, let me shatter your Daoist body. As his voice fell, he rushed forward and punched. The punch was like a flash flood, unstoppable. In the distance, Yi Xian's pupils suddenly shrank. He did not choose to defend. Instead, he stabbed with his sword. A life for a life. However, the human venerable's speed was much faster than his. The moment he attacked with his sword, the human venerable's fist had already landed on his chest. Bang! Yi Xian's chest caved in. At the same time, the human venerable's powerful strength directly sent him flying. Although the Daoist body was strong, at this moment, his cultivation was suppressed. His strength was less than half of his peak. Especially, he could not use a killer move like the Daoist sword. It could be said that he was being suppressed by the human venerable in both speed and strength. After sending Yi Xian flying with a punch, the human venerable did not stop. Instead, he took a step forward and threw a punch with each step. The punch was like a volcanic eruption, destroying heaven and earth. In the distance, Yi Xian's eyes flashed with anger. He held the executing heaven sword with both hands and slashed forward. At this moment, the human venerable's punch arrived. Boom! The surrounding space trembled. The human venerable's powerful punch directly sent the sword in Yi Xian's hand flying. At the same time, a destructive force instantly landed on Yi Xian's body. Bang! Yi Xian was instantly sent flying thousands of feet away. As soon as he stopped, he spat out several mouthfuls of blood. At the same time, his body had already split open. If this was outside, his body could continuously repair itself. But here, his cultivation was suppressed and he could not repair his body at all. The human venerable slowly walked toward Yi Xian. He slowly clenched his right hand and a powerful force gathered in his palm. Because the force was so strong, the space around him directly trembled. In the distance, Yi Xian wiped the blood from his mouth. He looked at the exit in the distance and said softly, "She should be safe now." He knew that as long as Immortal Gourd brought Nian Nian to the Netherworld Hall, even the Dark Abyss could not do anything to her. Thinking of this, the corner of Yi Xian's mouth curled up into a smile. But soon the smile froze. At the exit he saw a person. Nian Nian. In Nian Nian's hand was a gourd. Immortal Gourd. Seeing Nian Nian, the human venerable was stunned for a moment. Then he laughed. How interesting. In the distance Yi Xian's eyes widened. Immortal Gourd. What the hell are you doing? At this moment, Immortal Gourd appeared in front of Yi Xian with Nian Nian. At the same time, Immortal Gourd's voice sounded in Yi Xian's mind. Sai, you can't blame me. I want to take her away too. But she won't go. If I take her away by force, she will kill herself. I really can't help it. It's too King difficult for me. Yi Xian roared angrily. Your current strength far surpasses hers. Can't you stop her from killing herself? Immortal Gourd was a little helpless. I can beat her now, but she threatened me. She said that if I take her away, when she regains her memory, she will tear me to pieces. You know how terrifying she was at her peak. I'm scared. He had been beaten by Mu Niannian in the past. He was really afraid of Mu Niannian. Yi Xian was speechless. Nian Nian stared at Yixin. You said you wouldn't lie to me. Yixin felt a little guilty. I didn't lie to you. Nian Nian said angrily. You left me alone. Yixin shrugged. You did the same thing in the past. Nian Nian burst into tears. After crying for a while, she looked up at Yixin. Then we're even. Now no one can leave the other, okay? Yixin was silent. Nian Nian looked at Yixin. I don't want to live alone. Yixin was silent for a moment. He took Nian Nian's hand and said softly, okay. No one can leave the other. Nian Nian smiled through her tears. She gently hugged Yixin and said in a trembling voice, I'm afraid of death, but I'm even more afraid of living alone. Don't leave me. At this moment, the human venerable in the distance suddenly said, Yixin, where's the woman in the plain dress behind you? Yixin looked at the human venerable. The human venerable smiled and said, Isn't she your path protector? Why hasn't she appeared at a time like this? Don't tell me she's afraid. Yixin was about to speak. At this moment, the space in the distance was suddenly torn apart. The next moment, two women walked out of the torn space. Seeing the two women, Yixin was stunned. He knew one of them. It was Zhang Wenxiu. But he didn't know the woman next to Zhang Wenxiu. The human venerable's gaze fell on the woman next to Zhang Wenxiu. You're not the woman in the plain dress. The woman smiled and said, You seem a little disappointed. The human venerable smiled and said, I am indeed a little disappointed. Because we prepared a big gift for her. Unfortunately, she didn't come. What a pity. But it's okay, we can kill her in the future. Kill her? The woman blinked, and in the next moment she suddenly disappeared. The human venerable's expression changed. He suddenly punched out. The power of the punch was like a mountain flood, shaking the heaven and earth. However, as soon as he punched out, a jade-white hand grabbed his throat. One-hit kill. The human venerable's expression changed. He looked at the woman and said in horror, You're not suppressed. How is that possible? The woman looked at the human venerable and smiled. Kill my great mandate? You idiot, I can't even take one of her sword. You want to kill her? I'll kill your mother. I'll kill your mother. Then she suddenly clenched her fist. Boom. The human venerable's head exploded and turned into nothingness. Yixin. P.S. I want to be scolded. Chapter 1422. Shocking. Yixin had to admit that even he was shocked. An instant kill. This woman killed a human venerable in an instant. What level was this human venerable? She was a cultivator above the Dao attainment realm. Such a cultivator was killed by this woman in an instant. This was too terrifying. At this moment, Zhang Wenxiu was also extremely shocked. She knew that the woman who came with her was very strong, but she didn't expect her to be this strong. As if thinking of something, Zhang Wenxiu's pupils shrank. This woman said that she couldn't even take one strike from the woman in the plain dress. The woman in the plain dress. How strong was she? Zhang Wenxiu's heart was in turmoil. Not far away, the woman clapped her hands and turned to look at Yixin. I've been traveling for a few days and I only killed this piece of trash. Don't you feel ashamed? Yixin, Zhang Wenxiu hurriedly said, Auntie, you've worked hard. Auntie? Yixin was stunned, then looked at Zhang Wenxiu. Your auntie? Zhang Wenxiu said in a low voice, What's mine is also yours. Yixin. The woman walked to Yixin and looked at Yixin. To be precise, I'm your auntie. Auntie. Yixin blinked. Are there second aunties and third aunties? The woman nodded. Yes. Yixin, Zhang Wenxiu. Yixin said in a low voice, My mother and auntie, the woman smiled. We call your mother sisters. As for your mother, I can't say much. You'll know in the future. Yixin was speechless. In the future again. The woman looked around and said, This place is a little special. As she spoke, she looked at Yixin. This clone of mine is about to disappear. You'll have to deal with the rest yourself. Yixin asked in a deep voice, Aunt, where is your main body? The woman smiled. I'm busy. Yixin asked again, Is it far from here? The woman nodded. It's very far. Most importantly, some of the rules are very troublesome, and we don't want to break them. In short, it's quite troublesome for us to come here. Yixian said in a deep voice, "The Nether Pavilion." The woman smiled and said, "You only guessed it now?" Yixian shook his head and smiled. "I guessed it, but I'm not sure." The woman looked at Yixian. "You said you were an orphan in the Netherworld Hall and had no one to rely on. Kid, I'm here today to tell you two things. First, it's not that your father doesn't care about you. He has done a lot for you, but you don't know about it. Second, you think your enemies are strong now, but you don't know that your enemies in the future are even stronger. Just like me. Do you think I'm strong?" Yixian quickly nodded. The woman smiled. "But the Nether Pavilion is in a dangerous moment. The reason why my main body didn't come this time is because of this." Yixian fell silent. The woman patted Yixian's shoulder lightly. "This is the last time we'll help you, because we're not sure if we can survive. You're on your own." After saying that, her body gradually turned illusory. Yixian bowed slightly to the woman. "And, thank you." The woman smiled. "We're family, no need to be so polite." As she spoke, she looked at Nian Nian, who was beside Yixian. Nian Nian hesitated for a moment before saying softly, "Aunt?" The woman laughed. "I don't deserve that." Yixian quickly said, "Aunt, can you help Nian Nian recover her memory?" The woman shook her head. "No." Yixian was slightly puzzled. "Why not?" The woman looked at Yixian and smiled. "Can I not answer this question?" Yixian was speechless. The woman thought for a moment and said, "Forget it. I'll answer you. The reason why I can't help her recover her memory is because she's too strong. I can't stop her." As she spoke, she glanced at Nian Nian. "She's an extraordinary woman." Yixian frowned slightly. "Too strong?" The woman smiled. "Her sword Dao is the strongest besides those three." That's not right. That girl Tingyun should be on par with her. However, your sister Nian's strength isn't just in her sword Dao. In short, she has her own Dao. This chapter is not over. Please continue to the next page. Moreover, she's very strong. Ordinary people can't forcefully interfere with what she does. So, let nature take its course. In any case, she has no intention of harming you." Yixian wanted to ask more, but the woman had already vanished. She left in a carefree manner. After a moment of silence, Yixian left with Zhang Wenxiu and Nian Nian. Of course, Yixian did not forget the 6 Dao scriptures. When the woman killed the human supremacy, he had already kept them. Not long after Yixian and the others left, a middle-aged man suddenly appeared in the mortal world. The middle-aged man looked around and said softly, "I'm late." This person was one of the 3 supremacies of the Dark Abyss, the Earth Supremacy. Previously, when the human supremacy's soul tablet shattered, he rushed over here. Unfortunately, he was still too late. The Earth Supremacy looked around with a solemn expression. "Good one, Yixian. Looks like we've underestimated you." After saying that, his figure trembled slightly and disappeared. In the 5th dimension. When Yixian and the others returned to the 5th dimension, Su Zhe and Su Ku immediately appeared in front of Yixian. Su Zhe looked at Yixian and said, "Little friend, that human supremacy." Yixian said, "He's dead." Su Zhe looked at Yixian and asked, "Then Senior killed him?" Yixian nodded. Su Zhe was silent. One of the 3 supremacies of the Dark Abyss, human supremacy, was dead. Yixian looked at Su Zhe and asked, "Senior, how can I reach the Dao realm?" Su Zhe shook his head. "You can't." Yixian frowned slightly. "Why?" Su Zhe sighed softly. "Little friend, you've just broken through not long ago. It's not wise to force your way into the Dao realm now. Moreover, you haven't fully stabilized your Dao defense realm. It's not suitable for you to break through to the Dao realm." Yixian was silent. Su Zhe continued, "Of course, if you borrow the power of the God's Seal, it's not impossible. However, I don't recommend you to use the God's Seal. You're a genius. You can definitely create your own path." Yixian said softly, I don't have that much time. The human supremacy's sudden attack made him understand that the Dark Abyss was determined to kill him and Yen Yen. He didn't think that the death of the human supremacy would make the Dark Abyss stop. Not only would the Dark Abyss not stop, but it would also intensify. Suja hesitated for a moment and then said, "Little friend, why don't you come with us to the ancient God Abyss?" "Little friend, don't worry. If you go to the ancient God Abyss, even if the Dark Abyss Master personally takes action, the ancient God Abyss will protect you." Yi Xian shook his head. If he left this place, the entire fifth dimension would be completely destroyed. The fifth dimension could not stop the Dark Abyss. Suja sighed softly when he saw that Yi Xian didn't want to go to the ancient God Abyss. Yi Xian wasn't willing to give up the fifth dimension, so he would always be in a passive position. At this moment, Xian Chu suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. She looked at Yi Xian and said, "Let me tell you some bad news. The Xianhuan sect from the whirling world has sent people." Yi Xian frowned slightly. "The Xianhuan sect?" Xian Chu nodded. "A super sect from the whirling world. They came this time for the Tao scripture in your possession." Yi Xian was silent. He hadn't expected the forces from the whirling world to come so quickly. Xian Chu suddenly asked, "Who was that woman?" Yi Xian looked at Xian Chu. "My aunt." "Xian Chu," Yi Xian asked, "Miss Xian Chu, how many people from the Xianhuan sect have come?" Xian Chu shook her head. "I don't know. But we should know soon. Because they should have already arrived." Yi Xian nodded. "Thank you, Miss Xian Chu, for telling me." After saying that, he turned around and left with Nian Nian. Xian Chu looked at Yi Xian, not knowing what she was thinking. Somewhere in the main hall, Yi Xian sat cross-legged on the ground and slowly closed his eyes. If it wasn't for the help of the Netherworld Hall, would he and Nian Nian have survived? Of course not. Moreover, he also discovered that powerhouses above the enlightened Dao realm could pose a threat to his Daoist body. Improve his Dao body? This thought flashed through Yi Xian's mind, but he quickly rejected it. Previously, he had relied on the gift from the Jia Long Dragon clan to improve his Dao body. Now, if he didn't have an opportunity, it would be impossible for him to improve his Dao body. Whether it was his realm or his body, he couldn't improve them for the time being. After a while, Yi Xian said softly, "It seems that I can only take it step by step." Yi Xian no longer thought about improving his Dao body. Instead, he began to stabilize his Dao body. This chapter is not finished. Please continue. As Suja had said, he hadn't even fully understood the Dao controlling realm. He really shouldn't think about the Dao attainment realm. Somewhere in the starry sky, the earthly venerable Dark Abyss looked down at the five-dimensional universe. Beside him was the Ancestral Master. The Ancestral Master's expression was extremely solemn. He didn't expect the human venerable to die just like that. And he died in the mortal world. What did this mean? It meant that the other party wasn't suppressed by the dark Dao laws of the mortal world. The earthly venerable suddenly said, "Did you find out where that woman came from?" The Ancestral Master shook his head. "I couldn't find out." The earthly venerable frowned slightly. "You couldn't find out?" The Ancestral Master nodded. "She seemed to have appeared out of thin air." The earthly venerable was silent. After a while, the earthly venerable looked down. "I have already informed the celestial venerable that he will rush here in 3 days." Hearing this, the Ancestral Master was shocked. Is the celestial venerable going to make a move? The earthly venerable was expressionless. "The person behind Yi Xian is more powerful than we thought," the Ancestral Master said in a low voice. "Besides that, there is also the ancient God Abyss. They are determined to help Yi Xian." The earthly venerable frowned. "What is their purpose in doing this?" The Ancestral Master sighed softly. "The current situation is becoming more and more disadvantageous for us." The earthly venerable shook his head. "You are wrong." The Ancestral Master looked at the earthly venerable. The earthly venerable said softly, "As far as I know, many sects in the whirling world have already sent people to the five-dimensional universe. And their goal is that Dao scripture. In other words, Yi Xian's enemies will only increase. We can wait and see for now. The ancestral master was about to speak when a shadow suddenly appeared in the distant sky above the Dao city. The next moment, a powerful aura suddenly enveloped the entire Dao city. The earthly venerable chuckled. Look, the experts of the whirling world have arrived. There's going to be a good show to watch. In the distant sky above the Dao city, Yixian suddenly appeared in front of the shadow. The shadow gradually became solid. It was a middle-aged man. The Dao realm. The middle-aged man looked at Yixian. You are Yixian? Yixian nodded. Yes. The middle-aged man laughed. Since ancient times, the treasures of heaven and earth belong to the strong. You are so weak, how can you have the nerve to occupy the 6 Dao scriptures? Yixian suddenly took out the 6 scrolls of the Dao scripture. He placed them in front of himself and then looked at the middle-aged man. Senior, you're right. How about this? Senior, lower your cultivation level and fight with me. If you win, I will give these 6 scrolls to you. What do you think? The middle-aged man laughed. How interesting. A Dao manipulation realm cultivator wants to challenge me? Yixian looked at the middle-aged man. I have fought with experts above the Dark Abyss realm. They are very strong. I am no match for them. The middle-aged man shook his head. Oh no. It is not that they are strong, but that you are too weak. Yixian said in a low voice. Senior, they are experts from the Dark Abyss. The middle-aged man chuckled. Dark Abyss? What kind of rubbish place is that? How dare they compare to my whirling world? On the other side, the earthly venerable was expressionless. No one knew what he was thinking. The ancestral master's face was a little gloomy. The middle-aged man suddenly said, Fine, I will lower my realm and fight with you. You. At this moment, the earthly venerable's voice suddenly sounded in the sky. Sir, although Yixian is only at the Dao manipulation realm, his combat strength can kill those who have achieved the Dao, especially when he has a divine item doubting. The middle-aged man looked at the earthly venerable in the sky and smiled. You are from the Dark Abyss, right? The earthly venerable nodded. Yes. I am the Dark Abyss human venerable. The middle-aged man shook his head with a smile. Do you know what it means to be a frog at the bottom of a well? The earthly venerable looked at the middle-aged man without saying a word. The middle-aged man smiled. Yixian thinks that the experts from the Dark Abyss are strong because he is weak. He is a frog at the bottom of a well. He has not seen many Dao attainment realm cultivators, so he thinks that you are strong. You think that Yixian is not weak because you are weak. An expert above the Dao attainment realm can't even kill a Dao manipulation realm youth. I can only say that you are useless. Very, very useless. At this point, he shook his head with a smile. To think that the master of dark scripture was also a figure back then. Why are his descendants so useless? In the sky, the earthly venerable was silent. Beside him, the ancestral master's face was frighteningly gloomy. At this moment, the middle-aged man suddenly looked at the earthly venerable and said, As far as I know, the doubting has a divine item called the Seal of Dao. This item was the most precious treasure of the doubting back then. You said that Yixian has a divine item. Could it be this item? If it is this item, I have to be careful. The earthly venerable looked at the middle-aged man calmly. The Seal of Dao? How could he have such a divine item? The divine item I am talking about is the sword in his hand, not the Seal of Dao. Sir, you can rest assured. Go. Yixian. End of this chapter. Chapter 1423. Sword. The middle-aged man looked at the executing heaven sword in Yixian's hand when he heard the earthly venerable. He shook his head and smiled. While this sword isn't bad, that's all there is to it. As he spoke, he opened his palm and pressed it down lightly. In an instant, his realm was suppressed from the Dao attainment realm to the Dao attainment realm. As if he'd thought of something, the middle-aged man looked up at the earthly venerable. I'll show all of you what a true expert is. As he spoke, he pressed his right hand down once more. In an instant, he went from the Dao attainment realm to the Dao attainment realm. In the sky, the earthly venerable shook his head after a moment of silence. The world is vast and anything can happen. The ancestral master was speechless. Below, the middle-aged man looked at Yi Xian. This isn't bullying you, right? Yi Xian hesitated for a moment before he said, Senior, do you dare to suppress it to the Dao attainment realm? The crowd was speechless. The middle-aged man looked at Yi Xian. The Dao attainment realm? Yi Xian nodded. I don't mean anything else. I just want to see how strong experts above the Dao attainment realm are. If Senior can defeat me at the Dao attainment realm, then I, Yi Xian, will truly be convinced. The middle-aged man chuckled. Yi Xian, do you think I'm stupid? Yi Xian was speechless. The middle-aged man smiled. While I'm confident, I know that it's better to be safe than sorry. It's better to be careful when you're outside. So, are you going to fight or not? Yi Xian nodded. Yes. He vanished on the spot as soon as he finished speaking. A strand of sword light tore through the battlefield. It was a swift strike. Originally, the middle-aged man had a hint of vigilance in his eyes. Although he was confident, as he said, he was still very cautious. However, when he saw Yi Xian's sword, that trace of vigilance suddenly disappeared. This sword was very fast, but to him it was too weak. The middle-aged man shook his head and smiled. That's it. As he spoke, he blasted a punch forward. At this moment, Yi Xian's sword momentum suddenly changed. The originally ordinary sword became a Dao sword. At this moment, the middle-aged man's expression changed drastically. Because at this moment he sensed danger. Originally, he was about to attack, but he suddenly switched to defense. He crossed his arms and fiercely pushed them forward. At the same time, he stopped suppressing his cultivation level. However, Yi Xian's sword had already descended. Boom! In front of everyone's eyes, the middle-aged man was sent flying by Yi Xian's sword. In the process, the middle-aged man's fleshly body crumbled inch by inch. When he reappeared 10,000 feet away, only his soul remained. After Yi Xian pushed the middle-aged man back, he immediately pointed his finger and the soul-suppressing sword suddenly flew out. Right at this moment, the middle-aged man's soul suddenly vanished into the horizon. At the same time, a furious shout resounded from the horizon. Despicable! Shameless! Despicable! Shameless! I, Yi Jun, have never seen such a despicable and shameless person. Yi Xian was speechless. On the other side, Xian Chu shook her head. Beside her, the old man shook his head. This Yi Jun is really a weirdo, Xian Chu said softly. The Dao scripture and martial arts civilization began in the whirling world. From the beginning, when we faced the five-dimensional universe, we had the mentality of being superior to others. Let alone the five-dimensional universe, even when facing the Dark Abyss and Ancient God Abyss, we have the same mentality. However, whether it is the five-dimensional universe or the Dark Abyss, they are actually not weak. The old man was silent. In fact, when facing Yi Xian at the beginning, he did not pay too much attention to Yi Xian. At that time, in his heart, Yi Xian was just not bad. But now, it seemed that this Yi Xian was not only not bad. Not to mention the five-dimensional universe, even if Yi Xian was placed in the whirling world. This chapter is not finished, please continue. But, he was definitely the top existence of the younger generation. As if thinking of something, the old man shook his head and sighed. This young Master Yi is too good at pretending to be a pig to eat a tiger. He still could not forget how Yi Xian had shown weakness when they had just arrived. A person's strength was not scary, what was scary was when he hid his strength. At this moment, Xian Chu suddenly said, "When will Master arrive?" The old man said in a low voice, "In 2 days." Xian Chu nodded slightly. She looked at Yi Xian in the distance, thinking about something. In the distance, Yi Xian looked up at the terrestrial venerable, and the terrestrial venerable was also looking at Yi Xian. He had to admit that Yi Xian's strength surprised him. Although Yi Jun had suppressed his cultivation by 2 realms, his foundation was still there. However, he still could not take a blow from Yi Xian. One could imagine that if Yi Xian reached enlightenment, he would definitely be invincible among his peers. All along, the focus of the Dark Abyss had been on the forces behind Yi Xian and the ancient god Abyss, thus neglecting Yi Xian himself. In fact, Yi Xian himself was also very scary. This kind of person must be killed as an enemy. Yi Xian looked at the terrestrial venerable and smiled. Do you want to know how the human venerable died? The terrestrial venerable narrowed his eyes. Are you threatening me? Yi Xian smiled and turned to leave. In the sky, the terrestrial venerable stared at Yi Xian. How did the human venerable die? In fact, the death of the human venerable was not scary. What was scary was that the human venerable died in the mortal world. What did this mean? It meant that the woman who killed the human venerable was not suppressed by the dark way law of the mortal world. An abyss had met someone who could ignore the dark way law of the mortal world. Sedutingyun. That woman had caused an abyss to suffer great losses. At this moment, a voice suddenly sounded beside him. Netherworld Hall. The terrestrial venerable turned to see a woman standing beside him. The woman wore a simple black dress. The black dress was as black as ink and exuded a sense of oppression. Celestial Venerable. The ancestral master hurriedly bowed. Greetings, Celestial Venerable. The Celestial Venerable nodded. Beside her, the terrestrial venerable said, Big sister, you came early. The Celestial Venerable said softly, Third brother is dead. How could I not come early? The terrestrial venerable was silent. The Celestial Venerable looked at the terrestrial venerable. You don't look sad at all. The terrestrial venerable shook her head. There is no point in being sad. The Celestial Venerable smiled. Indeed. Then she looked down. I have found out that the person who helped him is from a force called Netherworld Hall in the fourth dimension. The terrestrial venerable frowned. Netherworld Hall? Why have I never heard of it? The celestial venerable said softly, a very ancient force and very mysterious. They appeared in the fourth dimension, but for some reason, they disappeared. The terrestrial venerable said in a low voice, Disappeared? Did they leave? The celestial venerable nodded. They left. As for where they went, I don't know. But for now, they are a very scary group of people. The terrestrial venerable asked, Why do you think so? The celestial venerable looked at the terrestrial venerable. Do you know why that woman disappeared after killing the human venerable? Without waiting for the terrestrial venerable to answer, the celestial venerable said, Because what she came was just a clone. Clone. The terrestrial venerable's pupils suddenly shrank. This, the celestial venerable smiled. A clone in the mortal world ignored the great Tao nomological laws left by Dark Ancestor and killed the human venerable. Don't you find it very unbelievable? The terrestrial venerable said in a low voice, This is too scary. This chapter is not finished. Please turn the page. The celestial venerable said softly, There is something even scarier. The terrestrial venerable looked at the celestial venerable. What? The celestial venerable looked down. He encountered the Naga race. As far as I know, the last patriarch of the Naga race was suppressed in the dark world by that person. I've been to the dark world. That old patriarch has fallen, which means that the Almighty has taken action. However, Yi Xian left the dark world with the granddaughter of the Naga race's old patriarch. There are two possibilities. The first is that the Almighty let Yi Xian and Naga go, which is basically impossible. The second is, at this point she did not continue. The terrestrial venerable said in a low voice. The second is that the person behind Yi Xian protected Yi Xian and Naga. The celestial venerable nodded. If someone really protected him, then we have to re-evaluate the strength of the force behind him. The terrestrial venerable suddenly asked, Big sister, do you know that plain-dressed woman? The celestial venerable was silent. The terrestrial venerable frowned slightly. The celestial venerable said softly, Mysterious and powerful. The terrestrial venerable asked, How powerful? The celestial venerable laughed lightly. Do you know why the ancient god Abyss is so determined to help Yi Xian? The terrestrial venerable said in a low voice, Because of the plain-dressed woman? The celestial venerable nodded. According to my investigation, the plain-dressed woman has been to the ancient god abyss. However, I do not know what happened there. But what is certain is that the ancient god abyss is so determined to protect Yixian. Even Suzhou has come personally. This must have something to do with the plain-dressed woman. And for the ancient god abyss to help Yixian at all costs, either the plain-dressed woman has made a deal with them, or they want to form a good relationship with the plain-dressed woman. If it is the latter, it means that the plain-dressed woman's strength is beyond our imagination. The terrestrial venerable was silent, his expression solemn. The celestial venerable said again, "There is one more thing. Yixian has swallowed the blood of the Nagadragon clan. His body has the power of the Nagadragon clan. The blood of the Nagadragon clan is unyielding and domineering. Not to mention among humans, even among the demonic beasts, it is at the top of the pyramid. However, Yixian can swallow their blood. What does this mean? It means that the power of Yixian's bloodline is above that of the Nagadragon clan. No, it should be far beyond the Nagadragon clan. However, we know nothing about the origin of the power of his bloodline." The terrestrial venerable shook his head. "This person is too mysterious." The celestial venerable looked down at the Dao city. Doubting ancestor Zhao Jiqing made him the Dao master after meeting him. There are two reasons. First, he took a fancy to him. Of course, he is indeed a rare genius. But I don't think Zhao Jiqing made him the Dao master and gave him the Dao seal just because of this. The terrestrial venerable said in a low voice, "The force behind him." The celestial venerable nodded. "It must be. Apart from that, this person is also related to Situ Tingyun. There must be an extremely mysterious and powerful force behind him. And these people might not belong to our world." The terrestrial venerable frowned slightly. "Do we have a chance of winning?" The celestial venerable shook his head.